Welcome to the Good Clinical Practice or GCP training. And it's lovely to see doctors, nurses and pharmacists and technicians here, a mixed audience. So GCP represents Good Clinical Practice, which is an international standard for conducting research and in particular clinical trials involving human subjects. And we're very fortunate to have the team from King Fahd Medical City here with us today. And first of all, I would like to invite Dr. Isamme AlFayyad to the podium to present the first talk. Dr. Isamme Fayyad is a chairperson of the Research Performance Assurance Department at the Research Center of the Riyadh Second Cluster. He has a master's degree in bioethics and has authored over 40 publications in index journals.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to extend our appreciation and thanks to the research center here at King Khalid Eye Hospital for this invitation. I hope it will be a fruitful session for you. This is an important topic and mandatory requirements for all researchers conducting clinical research. This is like the driving license. You cannot drive your car without a license. The same applies to research. The aim of getting the licensed car to make sure that you know the regulations, you know how to be safe, to protect yourself as a rider, protect the team within your vehicles, and to protect the public properties. The same applies to clinical research and GCP. We want you to know how to drive your research safely, maintaining the utmost measures of protection for your research subject, and we want as well to advance the science through research. We will go through 3 or 6 sessions today. By myself, Dr. Hussam is the chairperson of the Institutional Review Board, and late Dr. Dania Aljaroudi, the Executive Director of Research Center, she will join us to present her talk as well. So we will start from the beginning and we will highlight and introduce to you the history of GCP, how it was developed, for what reason, and we will dig into the content of the GCP, and so on. We will go through the content one by one. So as introduced by Dr. Malik, GCP, this is an international ethical guideline. It includes as well the scientific standards for the conduct of clinical research. Mainly, it was developed for clinical trial conducted in a human being. We need to agree that research, by definition, everyone should know it. It's a systematic investigation in a human being or their health-related information. So once you deal with a human being, you have to stop and think thoroughly how to protect them, especially with the ethical or unethical scandals that occurred during the last century. We will go through some or the key scandals that humanity has experienced within the last century. I'm not sure if you have heard before about it. But by the end, after all of these scandals, many guidelines were developed, and in 1996 there was an international agreement with the major 3 players in the conduct of clinical trial, United States, Europe, and Japan, to come up with a standardized guideline that govern the clinical trial conduct all over the world. So as I mentioned, GCP is an ethical and scientific guideline that govern the conduct of clinical research. So we have 2 components, the quality and scientific standard and the ethical standards. Why we need GCP? Above all, we need GCP to protect the right, the safety, and well-being of research subject. This is the most important and most critical one. Although healthcare system and specifically the IRB They support the advancement of science, but this first goal comes first. We want to protect the safety and well-being of research subjects. The IRB will not approve any research that jeopardizes the safety of the research subjects. So they are at the front line to protect the safety of research subjects. Just to introduce for you and share with you something. Any research activity in any institution is governed by two programs: the Human Research Subject Protection Program and the Research Program. The Human Research Subject Protection Program is the responsibility of the top authority. For example, at your hospital is the CEO. But he is delegating this task to the committee called the Institutional Review Board. That the main responsibility for this is to govern the clinical research conduct and ensure that the conduct of research is in compliance with the local and international ethical guideline. At the same side, we have the research center, you have the infrastructure, for example, research education, fund, biostatistics, scientific writing. All these efforts complement each other. The operation of these two programs is governed by policies and procedures. Here at the Kingdom, for example, we are governed by the bylaw of the National Committee of Bioethics that regulate the research conduct in living creatures, also by the Saudi FDA. And now we have a new player, which is the Saudi NIH, that is playing a role in governing the conduct of research at the Kingdom. I hope this is clear for you to have a bigger image about how the research program and the human research program complement each other. By the end, any clinical trial, we should come up with data to share it with the bigger community, isn't it? So the IRB, along with mandating the GCB, we are sure that any researcher, he will ensure that the credibility and reliability of his data is acceptable. So once it's inspected or audited by regulatory authorities, it will pass. There will be no obstacles to question any generated data. So these are the major ethics guideline that developed within the last century. The Nuremberg Code that was published or established in 1947 as a response to the Nazi experiment. The Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, issued by the World Medical Association, again as a response for the thalidomide tragedy or scandal, and Belmont Report in the United States as a response to the Tuskegee syphilis study. We will go through these key unethical clinical trial done in the last century. So, have you heard before about the Nazi experiment? Yes. Okay. I'm sure the majority has heard about this. You know, the Nazi regime, he developed or designed a group of scientists. Their aim is to conduct clinical research with the aim of advancing Nazi racial ideology, test medical procedure, and develop military advantage. You know, the Nazi regime was expanding all over Europe. So they have done multiple unethical clinical trials. These are some of the list. For example, they used to freeze prisoners or minorities who were in the concentration camps and to test how their bodies respond to cold temperature. You know, they were trying to invade the Soviet. So they need to know whether the soldier, they will tolerate a low temperature or not. High altitude experiment for the parachute, you know, for the fighters. The seawater, the salty water as well. sterilization and genetic experiment for advancing Nazi racial ideology as well, infectious disease, poisons, and so there was many clinical trials. By the end of this regime, there was a special court and a trial that was conducted between 1946 and 47. So they came up with the Nuremberg Code in 1947. It's a symbol. It was not issued by medical authority, just by the United Nations. They emphasize three major principles. Number one is that we should have ethical principles for the human or the experiment in a human being, mainly respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, and informed consent. Also, for the protection of the human subjects, the researchers should prove any measures for the protection of the research subject. So this is the first code that came as a response for the Nazi experiment. The Tuskegee one, I believe this is also a big scandal that came up by the Americans. This is not a clinical trial, but it's a clinical experiment where the Public Health Service in the United States, they injected African American with infected blood with syphilis. They wanted to know the natural progress of the syphilis disease. At that time, in 1932, the antibiotic or penicillin was not discovered yet. You got the point. So they recruited research subject. At that time, they were vulnerable. They have no autonomy. No informed consent was obtained. They were unduly influenced by providing them shelters, food, and the study continued even after the discovery of the penicillin. You get the point? In 1947, penicillin became effective to treat infectious diseases. So they continued this study until 1976, when this was discovered, or 72 discovered, and there was a big news in the media about this trial. So as a response for this, Belmont report was issued, and late in 1999, President Clinton, he provided apology on behalf of the American nation for those victims. This is the first and most advanced healthcare system in the world, in the United States. So don't think that bad research is done only in developing country. It's even in the developed country as well. Also, this one is a big scandal because the risk and harm was inflicted on a very vulnerable population, a pregnant woman who were injected with the thalidomide. Thalidomide is anticonvulsant drug given for pregnant women who is suffering from convulsion during their pregnancy. So the issue with this drug that there was no preclinical study, there was no safety profile from the preclinical. They came up with this drug immediately to the human being to be tested. So as a result, there was more than 10,000 babies with birth defects, in addition to thousands of deaths. The good is that the USA, they rejected this drug. United States, they did not approve this one. However, Canada, Germany, UK, France, they approved this drug. But the outcome was very, very harmful for the woman itself and the babies as well. So this is the first guideline came from a medical entity, the World Medical Association, that was issued in Helsinki, and they stressed on several principles, starting that we should obtain informed consent from the research subject. We should justify the benefit and risk for any clinical research. We have to have ethical oversight. That means we should monitor and audit all clinical trials. And we have to ensure we have the in-place measures to protect vulnerable populations. So going back to the GCP, the first GCP guideline was issued in 1996. These are the major three players: America, the European Union, and the United States as well. So this is the first edition. The second edition or revision took place in 2016, and it will be effective until July this year. Now we have the revision 3. It will be effective after July as well. And now it's open for public feedback and review as well. So let's now talk about the structure of GCP. What is there? You can Google now GCP guidelines revision 2, and you will have the PDF in your phone. So you can upload it and keep it as a guideline for you. So the GCP guideline composed of 8 sections. Each section addressed a separate topic. You need to familiarize yourself within or with this topic. The first section addresses the common terminology we use it in a clinical trial. I'm sure majority of clinicians, they are doing observational studies. However, in the business of a clinical trial, when you deal with pharmaceutical company, the terminology is a little bit different. For example, can you differentiate between what does it mean clinical study and clinical trial? Are they the same or not? Clinical trial is specifically when you test a new drug or a new medical device on a human being. However, clinical trial is a broader concept. You can include observational study as well. Also, they introduce for you what does it mean adverse events, adverse drug reaction, serious adverse event, and SUSAs, the suspected and unsuspected adverse drug reactions. So these are a new terminology for you as a clinician. Even if you think we are handling adverse event in our clinical practice, but by concept, it's completely different. Also, you need to differentiate between blinding. Do you know how many levels of blinding we have in a clinical trial? Do you know what does it mean single blind, double blind, triple blind? Yeah, so good. Randomization as well. People still, they mix till now between randomization and random sampling. They are completely different. So you need to know that randomization is about the allocation of study participant either to the treatment group or to the study or the control group. Meanwhile, the random sampling is about how to select a random sample from the general population. Essential documents. Essential documents, this is a very important or the most important part of any clinical trial. These are the documents needed to be submitted for the FDA to get the drug approved or the medical device, and needed for inspection by regulatory authorities. Also, impartial witness. Have you ever heard before about impartial witness? الشاهد المحايد. We need to understand what does it mean impartial witness when it's going to be used. Can we use waived consent in a clinical trial? Can we waive consent in a clinical trial? What do you think? Who agree? Can we include a research subject in a clinical trial without informed consent? No? We will see. Okay? Also, we need to know what does it mean legally acceptable representative. Within the applicable regulatory requirements in your country here, law is different between countries. we are working here according to the Sharia law, where we have a defined law or legal guardian for any person. And please don't mix between the, I don't know what you call it, Havana? The mother incubation for the babies. Yeah, this is something different from the nursery. Yeah, it's different or from the legal guardian concept. So we have a strict definition according to the Saudi regulation, who is the legal guardian. So the GCB, by the way, is a general statement. It should be applied within the context of each country. Okay? So what is applied for us here, it might be different from the United States or European countries. Also, we need to understand the concept or the doctrine of informed consent from research perspective. It's a little bit different from the informed consent in clinical practice. And Dr. Dania will cover about this. Also, we need to understand who is the investigator, who is the sponsor. What do we mean by CRO, Contract Research Organization? And finally, we need to understand that any conduct of clinical research should subject for monitoring and auditing, especially for the expedited studies and full review studies. So we don't have enough time to go through the definition itself because we have a limited 3 or 3.5 hours, but this is a good opportunity for you to go through it. It's simply, you can read it by your own and understand it. The second section in the GCB highlights the ethical standards. We said GCB is a scientific standard and ethical standards. So the second part or section of the GCB highlights the ethical standards that you should know ahead of initiation of any study. Again, you are as a researcher, although we support you to create a new knowledge or to come up with a new product or a medical device, but this should not be on behalf of the safety of the research subject. It's not only the IRB or the research center to protect the safety of the research subject. It's only you. You will be accountable legally, and you will be liable for the safety of research subject once you start your study. So the first principle address that clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with the GCB guidelines. That means all the technical and quality standards within the GCB should be followed without deviation or violation. Also, it should be in compliance with the Declaration of Helsinki and the applicable regulatory requirements. Applicable regulatory requirements, that means it's the regulations that is restricted for each country. In the United States, they allow to conduct trials in prisoners, isn't? Here, we don't have. Other countries, they're allowing phase 1, for example, clinical trial. Here, still we have restriction. Good? So we have to be cautious when we interpret the standards itself. Hopefully, in the research center here in the IRB, you have specialized people in how to interpret the regulation itself. Sometimes you will face small scenarios, okay, that really need a knowledgeable one in how to interpret the standards in order to make the progress easy for the researcher, meanwhile maintaining up to standard the conduct of the study. Also, you should, as a researcher, know how to make a balance between the risk and benefits. Do you think we can approve a study where the risk is higher than the benefits? At least the benefits should be equal. And here, when we talk about benefits, it's not about the clinical benefit as well. The risks include harm, physical harm, emotional harm, social and financial. So there is many aspects for the evaluation of the risk. Dr. Hussam, he will cover about this in his talk. Also, stressing about the scientific validity. Being honest with you, we don't have issue with the protocol or studies submitted by sponsored studies. They have medical writers, epidemiologists, research methodologists. They write their protocol up to standards. Even they care about the very details in each protocol. But when it comes to investigator-initiated clinical trial, for example, someone of your team, he want to start or do a clinical trial, they lack how to support or to provide a protocol with a good and valid scientific research proposal. So you need to understand that it is the responsibility of the investigator. Dr. Hussam, for example, he is doing multiple meetings with the PI or the investigator before he issue the approval to initiate a study. He will ask him, please modify this and this and this, reconsider this. I need more in-depth literature review. Your method need justification. The sample size is not accurate. So you need to stress about the scientific merit. Why? Because by the end you will generate data. You have two options after that. You want to publish to generalize your result with the broader community. So if you have issue with the scientific methodology, then you have limitations and you have flaws. That means you cannot generalize your study. No journal will be interested in your finding. The external and internal validity is questioned. So your work will be a mess. You will lose a lot of data, a lot of work for many years, funding even. So please make sure at the research center you provide the service of supporting any researcher in reviewing his research proposal before submitting to the IRB. Also, it's addressing the protocol compliance. This is a serious issue. Many researchers, they are violating the guidelines itself and the institutional policy. Violation is not good. Especially now, the regulatory bodies here, they have still not effective, but a good, I won't say punishing, but good regulations that will restrict any misconduct. Liability is important. Do you think during our monitoring we have discovered research subject included without informed consent? Yes. Yes, it's happened. What if he died, this patient? Who will pay the DA? Who will compensate for the patient himself? Definitely the institution will not, because you violate the regulations. Okay? So we have to make sure that we are following the regulations. It's not only at the level of informed consent, even the documentation, the follow-up visit, the sample size is not reached. Even if the informed consent was obtained, there is a deviation that was not done according to the protocol. It was done, but not exactly. Still there is loops inside. Also, informed consent, they are stressing that informed consent must be obtained in any research subject before participation in a clinical trial, and every research study should be approved by the IRB before the initiation. And even if you have amendment, you are not allowed to apply any amendment except the administrative one before obtaining the IRB approval. The third one is about the investigator responsibility. I will talk about it in a separate presentation. The Institutional Review Board, this is the presentation will be provided by Dr. Hussam. The sponsor, mainly don't worry about this. For the business of a clinical trial, all issues related to a sponsor is managed by the research center. They have research coordinator to deal with the sponsor's obligation, a clinical trial. However, at most, they want to make sure that the conduct of any clinical trial is in compliance with the GCP, is in compliance with the applicable regulatory standards in each country. So any sponsor he want to conduct clinical trial in any country, he should obtain approval from the FDA. So these are very technical. It's mainly the responsibility of the research center. Clinical trial protocol, it should be, this is an important one. This is addressed for you as a researcher. What is the minimum requirement of information needed to be included in any research protocol submitted for a clinical trial per se? This is the minimum. You can expand it, but this is the minimum requirements. Investigator brochure, this is a complete, you know, when you buy a drug from the pharmacy, it's come up with a pamphlet, isn't it? A pamphlet introduces you to you, what is this drug, what is the side effect, the dosing, the chemical characteristics and physical characteristics, isn't? This is the investigational brochure, but the concept is different. This is a compilation of clinical and non-clinical data. It includes the preclinical data starting from pharmacology, toxicology, pharmacokinetics, and the drug metabolism in the preclinical. Also, we have it at the level of the clinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, where we should have information about the pharmacokinetics, metabolism, pharmacodynamics, dose, response, safety, efficacy for the drug itself. This is very important for you because this will guide you in identifying and addressing any adverse event experienced by the research subject during the study conduct as well. Finally, this is the last section of the GCP. It addresses the essential document. Essential documents mean any document generated during the study until it's completed. We need these documents in order to support our application for the FDA. Also, we need it because all the document generated, it will be inspected by regulatory authorities, starting from the IRB and ending up with the FDA. Informed consent is a regulatory essential document. Study protocol, any amendment, any communication, documentation of the study outcome itself is an essential document. So any data documented during the study conduct is considered essential document. It should be kept in a trial master file or investigational study file. We have 2 copies, one with you as a researcher and one with the sponsor himself. The essential documents, they are divided according to the stage of clinical trial. We have essential document that should be in place before the initiation of clinical trial. We have essential document will be generated during the conduct of the study, and we have essential document that will be as well generated after the completion of the clinical trial, like the study closure, like the IRB acknowledgement of study closure as well. So this is a simple, concise overview about the GCP. I don't know if we have time for questions right now, or we should proceed with another talk. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isamme. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Hussam to talk about IRB role responsibilities. Dr. Hussam is the chairman of the IRB at King Fahd Medical City. He's an American board certified physician. He works as a consultant in pulmonary, critical care and sleep medicine at King Fahd Medical City. And we welcome him to KKESH today to talk about IRB role responsibilities.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's my first time here, so I'm glad that I got to visit KKESH, and thank you for inviting us and having us. As you have noticed, I am a clinician, so I'm similar to you. I do see patients, and I do relate to the density and the boredness of the data with what we are practicing. So hopefully I will be able to make the process easy and somehow applicable to everyone. So in life, in medicine, we come to work, we live, we exist in order to to practice and find out what's the truth, and this is the absolute truth. And what we do, the truth to us is the right thing to be done. Everybody, if you know this is the best thing you do, you will follow it. You come and do certain procedures for your patients because, not to do the procedure itself, because, wallah, it's interesting to do this particular surgery, because this surgery gives you the best outcome. When you read an article, it's not like just a matter of you like to read, you try to learn from it, and it's always nice to have information that are accurate so that you can benefit from it and you move on. And this is how we get our evidence-based practice updated. There are three components of the evidence base. It's you as a practitioner, pharmacist, nurse, or physician, or any other allied health practitioner, and the patient whom will be benefiting from your services. And what you practice on them is based on information that's available in the literature, maybe by experience, by whatever research output that's there. So the information part is the research part. And this is very important to put it into context of what we do and what we apply on our patients, because our goal is to achieve the truth, to do what is the best approach and what's the best thing to the patient. It's not to sell the drug or use the drug that is being sold by a company to make people rich, or to do something that will make us famous and just, people talk about us in the papers. So again, at the end of the day, our goal, our intentions are trying to do what is the right thing. And, lots of times we might argue and disagree on what is the right thing to be done in a specific circumstances, but this is existence. This is the interesting part of life. As an eye doctors or eye practitioners, probably you have not seen this. This is a calamity that affected people in Europe after the Second World War. It's called phocomelia, and it was observation by some physician that thalidomide, a medicine that was introduced in the 40s to treat depression after the war, and it's good for nausea and hyperemesis gravidarum. So they started giving it to the ladies who have, pregnant ladies who have nausea, and they ended up having kids with incompletely developed limbs. This is badness. This is not something that we like to do. Have medicine or have science been looked into a very good objective way, probably this would have not happened. Research, we have to understand our intention of research is to generate knowledge, and that's it. When you engage in a research activity, you are not trying to help the patient. You are not trying to do anything but look into a knowledge, whether positive or negative, and make it available to people. It's unlike anything else that we do in life, because when you go to the supermarket, your intention is to go to the supermarket to buy something. But here we are dealing with a knowledge. What are you going to do with the knowledge? It's another phase of application of this knowledge into your guidelines, into your practice. This is something that's good, I want to accept, or this is something that's bad, I will just try to abandon and avoid. Anytime a human being is involved in this process of generating knowledge, it's called a human research subject. This is a human research. And the human is not only giving you medicine or doing surgery on you, your data, your informations, your biological samples, all of this constitute the human at large. And anytime, any research, any trying to generate knowledge about this concept, it requires an IRB approval. So the short answer for, this is a very common question I get asked, do I need an IRB approval? The quick, very short answer is yes. even in the research that does not require IRB. Now journals are requesting an IRB approval because this at least facilitates their initial phase of acceptance of the study by a body that is considered independent, as you will notice. It's not the same as a practice. In research, I'm trying to find out if I do this will lead to a good outcome. In practice, when a patient comes to you and you have a disease that you're not sure what to do with it, you'll start, improvising, coming up with ideas based on your experience. The intention here is to help the patient. You might not end up helping them because there is no data. You just gave it a shot to help the patient. In research, it is different. This is very essential. I will keep saying this because this will really make research understandable. Why do we have to go through the hassle of getting research? When you do surgery for the patient and unfortunately the patient loses their eye or their sight, you did your best. Your intention was to help them. They have a bad disease. They have something probably something very rare or something that we never encountered before. So you go in the intention to help the patient. When you get your patient into the research, you're not helping them. You don't know that you're going to be helping them. You might be even harming them. So the idea of the research is to find out an information. And there should be an ethical body that will look into our practice. Ethics in general is the trying to understand what is the study of what's right and wrong. So what is ethical is the right thing to be done, and what's unethical is not the right thing to be done. And a lot of times we make things complicated in life. Ethics are ethics. You as a human being, ethical responsibilities to your family, to your country, to humanity at large is the same. Now, this can have subspecialization, some areas of like bioethics, business ethics, internet ethics, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, they are stemming from one same general concepts, but applied in different contexts. Since we are in the healthcare systems called bioethics, and we are trying in the bioethics when we assess a new situation is what we should do. At this, you have a circumstance that is not very well addressed. Ethically speaking, what shall we do? And why shall we do it in this way? And how would be like doing it in the best practiced way? So these are the questions that usually an ethicist has to try to answer. Again, in ethics, there is not much of, there's a lot of debate because you approach it in different ways. But at large, most of the ethical backgrounds, ethical principles, they merge. They give you, at the end of the day, the best outcome. And this is just examples of where do we obtain our ethics. Some people, from our side, we have our religion, alhamdulillah, we obtain a lot of our ethical practices from our religion. But even philosophers before, similar thing as Christianity, similar thing as Judaism, but some people might want it to go into philosophy. And there are some philosophical concepts that have been well studied, well established to look into it. Let me explain to you. Utilitarianism, some people think that the right thing to be done is the thing that gives the most value to the most number of people. So anything that has value, that is good in general, so that's the right thing to be done. This is the utilitarian approach. The ontological approach, no, we'll go with the principle. Lying is unacceptable. You are not supposed to lie even if you are going to save life. So again, this is a philosophical approach to it. From our religion, like I said, we have been practicing existence since days of Adam. So we build on our civilizations, our cultures, our practices, and our religions in order to decide what is right and what is wrong. A small example for you to think about. You wanted to donate your kidney to your brother or sister. Is that acceptable? Is that something that is good? Same circumstances, you wanted to sell your kidney. Somebody is looking for a kidney, they are having the disease, and you decided to sell that's your kidney in both situations, right? At the end of the day, you'll have surgery, they will take your kidney out, somebody else will take that kidney. In one circumstance, you felt, that's good. The other circumstance, you might not agree with that being good. You got the point? So again, this is what we talk about. In our Sharia عندنا, there is a lot of principles that we follow whenever we decide on something that is acceptable or not acceptable. طبعا القواعد العامة في الدين لا خلاف عليها. لكن there are a lot of new circumstances that gets generated by practice, by newer modern techniques, has to be studied according to what is acceptable way of thinking. Is this acceptable or not? Again, this might be complicated, but let's talk about the common things that we always do. You've heard about this study. Imagine yourself being a subject of a research, and an effective treatment became available while you are undergoing the research. We're not going to give you the effective treatment. We're going to continue to do research to collect data. You remember when we talked about research, the idea of research is to collect data, just to generate some knowledge. But if you know what is the right thing to be done, that generated knowledge is useless. There's no point in trying to identify and know, wallahi, this is the right thing to be done. You have a patient with meningitis. Will you put them in a clinical trial or you give them antibiotic? The answer here is very simple. If we don't know anything about meningitis, wallahi, we don't know. Let's find out. Let's try to generate some knowledge that the people after us will benefit from it. You've heard a little bit about the German Nuremberg trial. People, physicians, practitioners who were supposedly practicing medicine, they ended up doing unethical research that can reach into crimes against the humanity. And of course, the winners, whoever wins the war, they are writing the history and they dictate what happens. So these people were, brought to court and they were deemed to be unethical, and some of them were hanged because of their practices. And this is, you heard about it. There's a lot of things that we never heard about. I was told that the Chinese were doing live bullets on prisoners to test how effective these bullets in killing human subjects. Is that ethical? Did we hear about it? I'm sure all the military forces across the globe, they do their own research. They don't publish it, but they use it, utilize it in order to help them. Interrogation methods. In Russia, they used to keep people awake for 20 plus days. And some people actually died preventing them from sleep during their interrogation. So again, this is the things that we are talking about. This is at the basic human level. It's unethical. So humanity has proven that we're not good. We cannot be 100% reliable. Whenever we get a chance, probably we'll deviate and we can inflict harm. After that, regulating the research became an essential component, and there are some of the general rules that became available from the Nuremberg Code. I will go through them quickly. Research participants must be voluntary. I cannot do research on my subordinates. I am a nursing manager and I have people under me. You have to really get their approval to do research. If you are doing research, the idea of research is to generate knowledge. You say, okay, well, I'm the head of the department, I'm the director of the hospital, I do need data. That's a different story. That's a different story. Your data, you use it to improve your work. You have a quality project. You wanted to control your employees. The intention is different. And people, when you sign your contract, you will sign a disclosure that you give the employer some authority over some of your records. I see a lot of females here. Your HR have complete access to your file, right? Can they use that file for any other purposes? They should not. Ethically speaking, they should not. So if I'm doing research, I'm doing this to find out some data. Having the access to this data is somewhat have to be very careful. And we deal with this in the ethical approvals of research a lot in the hospitals because, example, one of our head nurses, he wanted to do research on the nurses who contracted COVID at the time of COVID. So I asked him a question, how are you gonna get your subjects? I said, oh, I have their records. I said, who told you that you can use these records to have publication about nurses who contracted COVID? Your records, because you are the manager. You cannot just go open the files of people and find out this is a CEO wanted one day to improve the compliance with one of the Ministry of Health applications where you share your know your numbers. I think it was the name. I cannot come get my subordinate, record your blood pressure, tell me if you're diabetic. That's not your right. This is a protection of the human being that I don't want my boss to know that I'm diabetic, right? This is your rights. So having an unauthorized access is not acceptable. And again, this is ethics in general, but when we use this in research, it is more controlled. So ethics is the same, one ethical concept that applies everywhere. In research, it has to be controlled. So your participation should be voluntary, and again, your research should be good for the society. You know, you cannot just do research just for the sake of doing research. The society has to benefit from that research, and there should be a sound theory. I cannot come up with anything that is just, wallahi, it crossed my mind, let's find out. No, you have to have very good background, because this might cause harm. You know, what's the value of causing harm in terms of trying to find some knowledge? Again, the definition of research, we are trying to find an information. Is it okay to harm somebody for the sake of finding an information? It's not acceptable. If a harm happens to your patient while you're trying to help them, wallahi, this is an expected side effect. You take a pill, you have like, you know, an antibiotic, you have diarrhea. You did not take the antibiotics to find out if it works or not. You take the antibiotics to get better. The diarrhea will be considered an acceptable common side effect. That's very well known. It's not the same as when we do something that we don't know about for the sake of getting like an information, whether it's good or bad, we don't know. And research must avoid unnecessary physical and mental suffering. The idea of the research is not to suffer, and we'll have a little bit more about that. The research subject cannot go forward if the potential, you know, harm is high on the subject. Will you, I always ask this question, will you agree to participate in a COVID vaccine, you know, study that is being developed by King Khalid University? Researchers, will you volunteer to give them the vaccine on yourself? And this is a problem. I get this shaking head every time I ask the question. So why? Well, that's more sophisticated to answer. But this is the idea. Imagine yourself that being a subject of a research without your consent, without you knowing even that you are a subject of a research ID. So again, this is harmful, or this is painful when it comes down to us. But you know, think about the other party. Think about your patient who came to you to begin with as an expert. I'm coming here for you. You are a great ophthalmologist. I heard good things about the place and I needed help. I did not come to you to do research on me. If I wanted to do research on you because that you might be fulfilling one of our research criteria, I will let you know. You can say yes and you can say no. One of the things that we don't want the physician to make the patient feel like, you know what, this is my doctor, I like him, I respect him. He asked me to participate in research. You know, that might be a coercion in a way or another. So again, you should not approach your patient. Maybe somebody else should. And a lot of times, depending on the research, I request that the PI is not the person who refers the patient. You wanted to do a research in this area, get referral from your colleagues. They are not biased. They are, you know, they think that that might be a good thing. The patient will agree to go or not. This is, again, something that we really enforce in our ethical reviews. The degree of the risk taken to the research participant cannot exceed the benefits. Yani if we know that there is a significant harm, we'll have to be very careful in trying to engage in an activity that, you know, like just to generate knowledge and causing harm. So again, this is very important concept. Environment, I cannot have any hospital to do research, and we have plenty of variation in our healthcare facilities in the kingdom. You know it. Not everybody is in the same bar and doing research. Not everybody is King Faisal or King Fahd. We would like to see more research centers, but it has to be done correctly. If the environment is not suitable to doing research, the place has to get ready first before they, you know, they engage in research activities. The the subject should determine, you know what, I changed my mind. He has full authority to say, I changed my mind and I want my data to be pulled out of that research file. They have the right to, and nobody should argue with them. If a patient comes to you and decides, you should not convince them to stay in the study as a physician. You should not try to talk them into agreeing to participate in the study. It has to be completely voluntary without any coercion. And of course, after that, you know, lots of other general ethical principles came into play. These things that we follow every day in all our practices. Respect for the individual, beneficence and non-maleficence, probably you've heard about these terms in the clinical settings, and justice. So these are the three important concepts that we apply in anything that we do in life. The first rule is to do no harm. This is beneficence or non-maleficence. So you are here to help the patient. If there is any harm that can influence the patient, you should be their advocate. You should respect people by engaging them, getting their opinion, getting their consent to participate. And justice, the allocation of the resources and inclusion of the research subjects is important to be practiced, i.e., why do we get prisoners, for example, to have research on that same vaccine that is being developed by the university researchers? Is it acceptable to have the prisoner, you know what, let's try it on the prisoners first, or let's try it on the expats first, or let's try it on women first, depending on the phase of life that has been going on. Or you know what, these kids, they don't know, who cares, nobody knows. So let's try on a subgroup of individuals a research that, you know, that's not ethical to be conducted. So again, this is something that we keep in mind. And when we approve research, we look into the risk-benefit ratio as looking into, is that going to be beneficial or not? We look into the experimental designs, and of course, we want to make sure that the persons who are doing the research are very well capable to taking care of the subject, rather than just, wallahi, I'm a researcher, I don't know what to do, I just wanted to follow this protocol. We will not allow that. A cardiologist cannot come to my ICU, says, I want to do research in the ICU. Are you qualified to take care of them? You might be part of the research team, but I do need somebody from the ICU to take care of the patient if they need something outside the protocol of the study. The justice is the subject selection. If you remember, at the time of COVID, there was an idea of the convalescent, the people who had COVID and recovered, if we take their serum and inject it in somebody else who's sick, that might be helpful. Just an idea, and we did research in the kingdom actually, and people were trying to make wasta. Oh, do you have an opening? I need to be involved. I have a sick one, a loved sick one. Physicians, we were getting this all the time. This is not justice. You have to really set your criteria, and whoever is fulfilling the criteria should enter into the study. And of course, you respect the individual when they are offered the informed consent, to really be aware and informed. The word informed is important here. And of course, you have to respect their privacy needs and confidentiality at large. In life and in research, we are biased. Everyone sitting in this room, including myself, we are biased. Everybody has their own biases in their different aspects of life. So bias is an important thing in research. It's not good. We have to really control the bias. The person who wants to do the research is biased to his idea. He thinks this is the most brilliant idea any human being ever came up with, right? You have somebody to look at them, but my friend, this is great, but let's find out. You are trying to generate knowledge. You are not here to help the individuals. And this is something I hope some of you will relate to, that research is an activity to find out. It's not like because I know this is the best thing to be done. So our bias has to be under check. And unfortunately, we have a lot of misconduct during research. You are like a fellow in retina, and by the time you finish your fellowship, you are not going to graduate unless you provide me with a research project. Requirement by the Saudi Council, right? What will you do? Will you postpone your graduation? ولا بتضرب الداتا? You just go do whatever, anything that, please find me anything. You know, I do get these actually approached by a lot of honest people in their masters and their PhDs. They just wanted an IRB approval so that they say that they have approvals. So you have to be careful that misconduct can be an issue. And most of our, here in this part of the world, it is, they are trying to get by, they are not intentional, they don't know any better, but that can lead into problems and the frauds similar to what we saw in the West. People were manipulating the data so that they can publish and make money from the research. People were writing articles that never happened, a research that was never conducted. This guy from Amsterdam, he wrote 15 articles published in decent journals. He never did the research. And of course, this is the guy who's from the US who was doing some vaccine research for HIV. They discovered that he was manipulating the data, so they put him on the side. You know what? Academically speaking, you are not allowed to do research anymore. One of the senators said, no, this is not enough. So they took him back to court. He ended up in the prison, and he had to pay $7 million in compensation for his using a public money unnecessarily. There is a law here in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi FDA, and I think it's still not completely signed yet by the king, that misconduct of research, fraudulent research activities can be, I think, up to 5 million, and there will be imprisonment for about 3 years. So again, we are following the steps of other people to control what can happen. Research can be a very expensive business, and it's good, lucrative business. Some of the research studies that we come across can cost hundreds of millions of dollars between centers, countries, continents. So again, there is money for the researchers, for the research coordinators, for the research centers. So again, we have to be very careful because this is another source of bias. Why are you doing this? I just wanted to include people. The more people I include, the more likelihood that I will generate money. And the more people I include, the more likelihood that I will become famous. All these are sources of bias, and we have to control that. Declaration of Helsinki came in the 60s, kind of repeating of what we said. There are general rules that you have to be aware of whenever you conduct research, similar to the like what we mentioned earlier. There is a term called equipoise, and from ethics, equipoise meaning that you're not completely sure. So if you know what is the right thing to be done for the patient, it is unethical to do research on it. It's not just I wanted to do research to participate. We have patients who come across, but I believe if I give him this therapy, he will benefit from it. This is given. This is a practice. I should offer him the best possible chances for him rather than putting him in a study that might or might not show, just to generate knowledge. And equipoise can be a very, difficult dilemma in our minds. So there is something called collective equipoise, meaning the guidelines is not clear about how to treat alcohol-induced, macular degeneration. Are you going to do the biologics? I think that's already known, right? We have plenty of data that you have biologics to use it for these diseases. But if the society thinks that still there is room for more data, that might be okay to perform research. Research in the kingdom is very well monitored. It's in the process of really approaching higher levels like the West. There is the NCBE, اللي هي اللائحة التنفيذية لنظام أخلاقيات البحث. It's an independent body, part of CACS, but they report directly to the king, and they have the regulations that are published. It's available online, and they just talk about how, what are the things that we have to do. Our main purpose of the ethical reviews for the research and approval is to protect the human subject. And of course, any research is conducted in the kingdom has to comply with Sharia law. I cannot allow you to do research that is haram, simple, or that is illegal. Although you are trying to find an information, but there are priorities. I'm not going to just overcome al-haram for the finding out or the law to find out some information. And again, we have to really be certain that the patient subject is being protected as we talked about. The Saudi FDA has followed similar to the GCP. Now, let me talk a little bit about GCP. Probably Issam did not mention it or clarified it very well. The GCP is a group of people from Europe mainly. They included some people from the US representation and Japan. They came up and they set the standards of how do you really do research, as at least it's recommended. It gives you a safety or a feel of confidence about the research that is being done according to the GCP. You might trust research that comes from the US, for example, but you might not trust research that comes from Mozambique. Do you relate to that? You don't know what they do in Mozambique, but this process is very well accepted, very well advocated, and that's what they practice. The idea of the GCP is to be confident of the data that you are looking at, the research output you trust. If I'm going not to trust the research data, we are in trouble. You remember what happened at the time of COVID? Everybody and anybody was publishing anything. So what happened to the doctors and the public? Nobody knew anything. خلاص ترامب بيحكي hydroxychloroquine ومش عارف مين بيحكي serum. There is no data, there is no science. So you lose the trust in the whole system, which is something that we cannot afford. So again, in research, we are trying to generate data, and the protection of the subject is very, very important. How can we do that? It is an independent committee. In institutions, it's independent, reporting to the CEO. I am a pulmonologist. My boss, when he submits research, he's not my boss. I have the authority to tell him no. He should not have any authority over me to let things go. So again, our work is independent, and we focus more on the informed consent. You will hear a whole talk about the informed consent, and we make sure the protocol respects the individual and protect their identity and all of this. I'll skip the informed research concepts. And of course, we have to follow the social value of research. A small example, a researcher, a university researcher, wanted to know the status of incest in the kingdom. I don't know if you know what incest is, but she's going to go ask her colleagues, female colleagues in the university, have you been sexually assaulted by your brother or father? Or is that something that's socially acceptable in our community? I refuse to approve the protocol simply because it's an information that is not used. This is not our society. We don't need to be knowing this information. Although you might say, oh, why not? We have to be open-minded. Let's find out. This is not going to be socially acceptable. Another researcher wanted to find, the idea of the research came, they had an HIV video for to make people aware of the condition. The researcher wrote in the proposal that this video was aired 8 years before and the general public reacted negatively. The newspapers, people were not happy about this. So now she wanted to study what their approach is. I said, why are you stirring the dust? And it's something that has been proven before to the society. The society is not accepting this. Why do you want to research it? So I also rejected that project. Again, we always look at the risk-benefit ratio, and the risk is anything that might put you at harm more than the usual risk to, you coming to my clinic, you might get exposed to anything normally. So this is considered minimal risk, no more than any minimal risk if you participate in research. Anything else is considered more than minimal risk. And we have to look into the risk. If the risk is high, we have to approach the risk as being high risk. And there is no more than minimal risk that can be easily. This is important and very important to talk about the risk simply because it will determine what type of approval I will give you in the IRB. So this is the majority of what we do is assessment of the risk. If the risk is low, we can say this is exempt. I, as a chairman, I can approve the project. If the risk is high, I need a full board where everybody will see the protocol and will vote on it. And the voting has to follow the usual protocol, and people should really try to come up with the best approach for this. Have to be remembering that you as a PI is responsible for your research, and you have to be able to really manage the risk. You are, at the end of the day, a practitioner, a physician, a pharmacist, a nurse. So you have to know better what helps your patient and think of their risk, because this is very important. Some of the simple projects, and I do get this a lot, although it's exempt, it's just asking people questions, they voluntarily give you the answer, might put them in trouble. Now, this morning, I reviewed a project for a nurse who wants to see the skills of nurses in performing a procedure in the neurology ward. I said, this is great, it's simple, they will agree to it, and you will observe them, how do they do the procedure and their skill, and you can record this. But what if the results were not helpful? Nurse X is really poor performance in this particular skill. And it happened her supervisor knew about this. Will that put her at risk of maybe employment issues, maybe some punishment issues? Research should not lead to these negatives. I cannot come and allow a research to be done. Let's do a drug addiction research at KKH. Okay, you can do it as a concept. Nothing wrong. We'll come up with 1% of the employees at this hospital, they use drugs. But if this person was identified, they will come and they put them in jail, right? They might lose their job, صح? The research is not intended to do that. So if there is a risk of doing this, this is not a low risk research that you're just collecting data. This is very high risk, and the individual might, really, have a problem in their jobs and in their employment. Protection of the subjects, even at this مستوى البسيط, employment data, and sometimes secondarily, we have to look into the accuracy of the research, because we have to maintain the integrity, and I will talk more about this during the monitoring visit. All what you need to do is you submit a request for the IRB to review a project. I always ask for some basic data, one of which is the protocol. What is it that you are going to try to tell us? And any supporting documents. If you are going to use a survey, I want to see the survey. Examples of the survey, a lady wanted to look into the empowerment of women in the kingdom. And she submitted a questionnaire about women empowerment. There were 12 items, 11 of which were empowerment in the bedroom. Is that something that we accept as a simple questionnaire? Now, I spoke with Dina. I said, did you read the questionnaire that you submitted? She did not read it. She found it online somewhere, and she just, I said, open the, while we were talking to me, open this. Is that a representative of women empowerment? So she apologized, and she retracted and she came up with another, tool. So again, be careful, these things has to be reviewed, because sometimes, as they say, the devil is in the details. I do request GCP training similar to the one that you do in order to be aware of all these concepts before they engage in research. And later on we'll talk about, they will submit their idea and we'll look into their concept. Is it really good? Did they address the risk-benefit ratio? Am I able to clearly understand what is this researcher trying to do so that I can make an assessment of their approvability, and eventually I will approve it. Now, approval of the research does not end there. There are some areas I skipped because it will be covered in other lectures from your responsibility. But the IRB does not end by giving approval and that's it. There is more work that has to be done. And at the end of the day, the goal is not to make your life difficult. The goal is to ensure the safety and the protection of the subject as well as doing the research correctly. Trust me, you do want, as a research subject, yourself, potential research subjects, you do want somebody to look at, after you, make sure that the processes are very well maintained. You will feel more comfortable participating in a research if you know that you are protected, if you know your data is very well respected, and you know there is a body in the institution that will be acting on your behalf. It's not a matter, the idea, in general idea, I've heard this so many times, احنا مش فئران يعني تجارب. You're trying to try something on me. We are not animal models for you to try on us. Simply because there is an issue of trust between our research subjects, patients, yourselves, and wherever you are having the research. Having a research center, having a proper policies and procedures, people will feel comfortable to participate. When my nurses feel that I'm trying to protect them from their managers, they will appreciate that. Next time they go into a research, if it's approved, wallahi, we trust this guy or this committee is doing their best to protect us. Since they approved it, they don't see anything major with it. And trust me, we do request a lot of modifications, as simple as changing a question to all the way changing the methodology of the research in protection of institution. We do have to protect the institution as well. We cannot allow people to start talking negatively about institutions in terms of research. And this is how we build our trust. People will trust us and we will continue to be in business. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hussam. Very interesting indeed. So we just have a couple of minutes for questions, if anyone wants to ask any questions to the two speakers. So I have a question for you. So, you talked about clinical equipoise, that you have to have a genuine uncertainty whether the treatment's going to work. Otherwise, it's unethical to randomize people to a treatment which is inferior. But I noticed that doesn't always happen in literature. Some people have been put in a clinical trial. I'll give you an example. There's a trial called the UK GTS, which is of glaucoma. They randomize people to have glaucoma drops to lower the eye pressure or to have placebo. And previous studies have shown, they weren't clinical trials, but previous studies we know that the drops work for glaucoma and they slow the progression. So, some people argued it was unethical, this trial. So, what level of evidence do you need to be able to justify to carry out a clinical trial?
Okay, so this has two parts. One part from the practitioner point of view. You are the person who will enroll your patient in the study. So at the personal ethical level, as a practitioner, if you know the patient will be benefiting from any procedure you will do for them, it's unethical for you to enroll them in a study. So this is the first part. Even if there is a very good, well-suited study to look into. Let me give you a real-life example. I have a patient who have pulmonary hypertension, and I enrolled him already in a clinical trial. That was, we do need to know the data on it. During the trial, I felt that the patient is not progressing. We don't know. He's blinded the study. Is he getting the new treatment? But he was deteriorating to the level that I was not happy. So I took him out of the study, and I treated him the way I know to treat him, and he got better. So this is my ethical responsibility to my patient. Yes, there is a protocol that I have to manage the patient as per the protocol, but the equipoise when I feel this particular individual. So if you have a patient and you believe, and to begin with, if you really don't agree with the research question at the personal level, at the institutional level, you should not accept to do the study. Yani when they approach you to do a clinical trial, you have to buy into the idea of the clinical trial. Now, the other part is for the regulatory bodies, whether the IRB or even the FDA, where are we going to allow a study to go with a placebo? And this is common. Now, I challenge, there is very few placebo-controlled studies today in the world, simply because medicine is not 200 years ago or 100 years ago. We have so many information available. So what do people tend to do? And this is very important to mention. They go to India. They think they can come to Saudi Arabia to do a study simply because the regulations are not that stringent. And this happened. And by the way, this is unethical. In a lot of companies in the US, they wanted to do a placebo control. But the FDA, the ethics committees, will not allow them to do a placebo-controlled study. So what do? The HIV drugs, the TB drugs, where they go to poor countries, similar to the Tuskegee group that they did. They know that they were offering them something. And they can just justify it for themselves, but the US or the really people who are high standard and respect themselves will not accept that. You got my point? So again, the equipoise is a question that is really uncertain. There is no certainty. The medicine is always evolving. So you evolve it according to the best current practice. And I did not talk much about this is not the setup for talking about the control groups in general, but the control can be a standard of care, and on top of which you add something else. The studies are becoming more difficult, more sophisticated, yet it has to be done correctly. I cannot allow a standard of care to be replaced by something I don't know about. And again, this is the essence of the whole talk I made. If you believe, even if it's still questionable at the society level, and you look into this individual and you say, you know what, I'm going to give you this medicine because I know this will help you, it's unethical to put them in a clinical trial. Clinical trial is to find out an information. Practice is to help them. Intention is to really get them out of trouble. I hope that helped.
No,
and of course, sometimes at the individual level, you said sometimes I'm not sure. So you follow the society level. There is a lot of societies, medical societies, that might in the guidelines say, we don't know for sure. You can have A or B. So you can study that. Or the word is not completely out. And there's a lot of trials that keep going on, but with the minimum acceptable rate of involvement to treat the patient. You can always take them out. This is a dynamic process. And that's why the PI has to be an expert in his area of study. We rely more on the PI to do the right thing. That's why we are doing this. Ethics, nothing is written in ethics. Ethics is inside you. زي الدين تبعنا. يعني this is something that has to be inside of you to do the right thing at the end of the day. Yes, you have to document. But if you are from the beginning, you are having biases and corruptions and misconduct, I don't know what will happen. There is no guarantees. So we rely on understanding in our principal function is to help the patient, not to do research. And if doing research will harm them in any way or form, we should not do that research, at least for that individual.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just running a couple of minutes behind, so we'll carry on and take a break a bit later. So I'd like to invite Mr. Isamme again to talk about principal investigator roles.
Okay, to continue inshallah with the section related to principal investigator roles and responsibility. The majority of problems we have it during the clinical research conduct is related to this domain, where the investigator themselves, they don't know their obligation in the conduct of clinical research. Always when we do monitoring and auditing, their reply is, should I do this? I don't know about it. This is their response. From where you get this point? Nobody told me about this. This is why we are here and why the research center, they are obliged to train their researchers on good clinical practice guidelines. Researchers, they need to know their obligation, their roles and responsibility during the conduct of clinical research. You know, you are dealing with a human being, with their lives, with their well-being. So never ever try to jeopardize their safety, whether intentionally or not. Believe me, we can talk about hundreds of cases of misconduct related to negligence in the responsibilities entitled for researchers. So the GCP has highlighted specific standards that each researcher, she should know about them before the initiation of clinical trial. By the way, when you provide a GCP certificate for the IRB, this means that you understand your roles and responsibility. Don't come again and say that I don't know about it. This is your certificate. You confirm that you know the regulations. I will tell you one example. We have done a monitoring visit for one of the studies. I asked upfront the researcher himself, give me your GCP certificate. You know what is his answer? He looked at his secretary. Is this the certificate? You do it for me? You did it for me? So the secretary, she did the GCP certificate, the online exam, for the investigator. That means he doesn't know about his regulation. This gives you impression about the bad things that will come during the monitoring. Okay? So keep in mind that knowing the responsibilities means you are liable upfront. So, number one, you should be qualified as investigator. Qualification means that you should be qualified by education, by experience, and by training. Education, I cannot allow oncology physician to do a clinical trial in neurology. This is out of his qualification, unless it's a shared or a mutual study with a neuro-oncology study. Number two, I cannot allow a freshly graduated consultant to conduct high-level clinical trial. He lacks the clinical experience. Number three, the training. You know, all sponsors, they provide a training for any investigator before the study initiation. So the IRB, they must ensure that any investigator who is conducting clinical trial, he's qualified by education, by experience, and by training. This is a requirement. Either not only the IRB will monitor and audit, also the regulatory bodies when they do the inspection. Also, you should be familiar as investigator with the investigational product. This is really a big issue. You know, during the clinical treatment, you treat your patient with an approved drug. You have heard about it. You have practiced this before. You have a colleague who can give you insight, and you can consult him to give you his opinion or knowledge about this. In the clinical research, the only source for you is the investigational brochure to give you information about the investigational product. So you have to be familiar with this. This will tell you how to observe your patient during the clinical trial, how to manage any side effect, or even how to identify whether this event experienced by the research subject should be reported or not to the regulatory authorities as well. Also, you should be qualified on training in human research subject protection. This is why you are here. The IRB will not approve any study unless you provide a certification in human research subject to protection. Now, for the institution where I'm belonging in, for King Fahd Medical City, for clinical trials, we only accept good clinical practice guideline certificate. Although there is online certificate, you can go read it by yourself, read the modules, then go for MCQs, then you can pass. But this is not enough for us at King Fahd Medical City to conduct clinical trial. You need to know or to show in-depth understanding of good clinical practice guideline. This is what we mean by investigator qualification. So you have to test yourself. Do I fulfill all these requirements or not? Adequacy of resources. When we do clinical trial, you are not working alone. You need to work with the laboratory. You need a research pharmacist. You need a nurse coordinator. You need medical imaging. Isn't? These are a team. You need a sub-investigator who will support you, or a co-investigator to cover you during your sabbatical leave, isn't? So you have to make sure that you have these resources in place. This is at the level of manpower. At the level of the equipment itself, do we have the specification, for example, for MRI or CTs? Can we do this kind of blood work or not? That's why all sponsors, when they reach any institution to conduct clinical trial, they send a form called the feasibility form. They want to assess whether your site are able to provide the adequate resources to conduct the study itself. This includes the number of patients or the patient eligible to be included in the study. It happens that many studies started and closed without recruiting a single patient over 3 years or 5 years. Why? Because the investigator inappropriately, he did not evaluate whether he has adequate number of patients. So resources is not only equipment and manpower, but also patients themselves. This is a bad impression for sponsors that I'm investing money in your site. For 3 years, you fail to recruit one single patient. So this is what we need to understand it. Also, you need to make sure that your resources are trained and well qualified to do the study itself. I cannot allow a physician who doesn't have, for example, a credentialing to do such kind of a procedure. I need to make sure that all the personnel included in the study are trained on GCP guidelines, or they have a specification with training needed for the study itself. Medical care. With no doubt, research subject during the study conduct, they will experience side effects. Some side effects might be expected according to the study brochure or investigator brochure, but some side effects really very serious that need hospitalization or might lead or put the patient at a life-threatening condition. So you have to ask yourself whether my institution can provide such kind of service. For example, do you think that your site qualified to do clinical trial in oncology? If yes, can you manage any experienced side effect in the ER, in the floor, in the intensive care units, and etc.? Communication with the IRB. This is a very important one. Although you can delegate this task for a study coordinator to complete the forms for you on your behalf and communicate with the IRB for any submissions, for reporting adverse event, for renewals, for making any amendments. But the responsibility relies on the shoulder of the PIs. So he is the one who's responsible or making sure that all communication needed with the IRB goes through him. At least he is covered in any communication. He should sign by himself any form needed by the IRB. That means that he acknowledged the IRB, they are sure that the investigator himself aware about this kind of communication. This is a very important. And this kind of communication is subjected for inspection by regulatory authorities. Compliance with the protocol. Who is the one responsible for making sure that all the study team is compliant with the study protocol as is without any deviation or violation? Definitely the principal investigator. Even if someone did a mistake, it's your own responsibility. It happens that we monitored the research pharmacy and we discovered that there is investigational drug that is expired. We are not blaming the research pharmacist alone. We will blame the investigator himself, because part of your responsibility is to go and check your drugs in the research pharmacy every mean and while. Okay? So this is about the compliance with the protocol. You have to make sure that all your study team, they are following the study procedure. You have to prove by evidence that you have oversight over their operation during the study. And in case of any deviation or violation, you have to be transparent and maintain integrity in the conduct of clinical research. You have to document this if there is any deviation or violation. The IRBs everywhere, they have special forms, okay, called deviation and violation. You have to report this to the IRB. It's not only about the safety of the patient themselves, but also about the integrity of data. Now, you know the principle of intent to treat in the data analysis, isn't it? So if you miss some patient visit that you need to collect data during these visits, okay, this will affect the quality of data, isn't it? So you need to report this as a protocol deviation or violation, because this will decide how the data will be analyzed by the sponsor themselves. If you are making any amendment or modification to your research study or research proposal, you have to make sure that the IRB knows about this. You cannot make any change without getting approval or an acknowledgement letter by the IRB, except in some situation where there is an immediate hazard for the research subject. An example that, you know, for the double-blind studies, let's say that you received a patient in the ER in a bad situation and you want to break the blinding itself to treat your patient. You want to make sure in which treatment group he is. So I need to break the blinding. This is an emergency situation. You can violate by this time. But even though you have to document this, you have to report this to the IRB and get an IRB acknowledgement of this event. Again, the investigation of the product, this is a very important responsibility that as an investigator, you need to know it exactly. Unfortunately, it happens that this is a document that left aside whenever we do a monitoring. When we ask the researcher himself, please can you list for me 2 or 3 side effects that might be experienced in the cardiac system for your research subject? He doesn't know. Even he doesn't know where to look about this. So our next question, how you can identify this side effect experienced by your research subject is adverse drug reaction or adverse event, whether it should be reported or not. This is because of lack of the characteristics or the information with the investigational product. Now the investigational product, especially the drugs, it's maintained with the research pharmacy. The pharmacists, the research pharmacists, they have accountability. I know, is there any research pharmacist here? They have accountability record for all investigational product, they have it. About the storing, how they handle it, about the temperature, the integrity, how to manage the expired drug, how to retain the unused drug. So all these are responsibility handled by the investigator himself. Don't rely on the research pharmacist. Please, if you are an investigator, go every mean and while and visit the research pharmacy and check your medication in the study. Randomization and blinding. This is also an important aspect. Randomization makes or avoid any bias that could affect the quality of your data. Preaching or breaking the blinding of the research subject, this is a serious ethical and scientific issue. It's your responsibility to make sure that all level of blinding are maintained, and it's only broken whenever needed in emergency situation. And don't forget the documentation. Documentation is the only proof that how you maintain a good conduct of your research. Informed consent. Who is eligible to obtain the informed consent? We are 5 consultants in the OB-GYN. I am the primary investigator. Should my colleague obtain informed consent from the research subject? What do you think? Agree or not? Can? He's not part of the study. He doesn't have the right to contact the patient even. He doesn't have the right to read anything about the study itself. So if he obtains the informed consent, it's not valid. It's worthless. That means it does not exist. It's like you are not obtaining the consent from the research subject. So the one who should obtain the informed consent is the investigator himself or a delegated sub-investigator. He's part of the study. And his name should be listed in the IRB approved letter. So we need to be careful about this. Always avoid any undue influence when you obtain the informed consent. Don't say, I am your best doctor. Don't please upset me. I need you in the study. No. Or we will pay money for you. This is not accepted. This is called undue influence. Even when we look at the budget and for any study, we look for the incentives, of the value of the incentives released for the research subject, whether it's above the fair market value. So when we give money for the researcher, it is calculated according to the currency change and the fair market value for each country. Informed consent, Dr. Dania will talk about this in detail, so I will leave the space for her. So she will enrich as well with many case scenarios during her experience. Recording the data generated from the study. All sponsors, they care about the generated knowledge. This is what they need. They need to build 2 profiles, the efficacy profile and the safety profile. So your responsibility as investigator to document any event encountered during the study conduct to support the development of these 2 profiles, the efficacy and the safety profiles. How to record and document this? You have to follow a common acronym in clinical research called ALQA. ALQA, that's mean A stands for attributable. We can know this documentation done by this person. Legible, I can read it. You are eligible to make this entry. Concurrent, the events occur today. I try my best to document it by today, not tomorrow or late. original, that should be with wet ink or direct entry. The only copy we accept is for the heat-sensitive documents like the ECG. It's a heat-sensitive. You know, by time, the reading itself will disappear, especially that we are archiving the document of clinical trials for 10 years or 15 years. So we can accept copies of heat-sensitive documents only. Attributable, that means we can, the data generated, it's accurate and represent really the situation occurred. Your patient here developed tachycardia, you should provide document that a tachycardia was discovered with the patient. All these generated data will be transferred to a document called case report form. You know, in observational study, we collect the data through surveys, questionnaire, isn't it? In a clinical trial, we don't use the word even survey or a questionnaire. We use the term of case report form, CRF. If it is electronic, we call it ECRF. In the metadata system, the sponsors provide you with the platform. You have a secured access. You will share the data generated in the study. Also, you are responsible as investigator for reporting any adverse event encountered during the study itself. We have issue, as I will cover during the reporting, during the study, the presentation, sorry, of safety reporting, about the quality of reporting of adverse event to the IRB and to the regulatory authorities. We have poor documentation. It's not informative. So the end is to generate reports that is called essential documents that will support the application of the sponsors for the FDA. We have talked about this in the first presentation. These are examples of essential document, investigation brochure, signed protocol and amendment, delegation log, training records, investigator agreement, the CVs, the GCP certificate, the medical license, IRB submission, approvals, amendment, and etc. Any communication with the sponsors, with the contract research or organization, these are called essential document. Now, for the clinical trial, usually we submit a biannual progress report to the IRB. The IRB, they are not following you on every day. So you need to submit at least once, but some institutions, they require 2, and the majority of sponsors, 2 reports to be submitted to the IRB. This will, where you provide the IRB with the progress of your study. How many patients recruited, by gender, any adverse event, how many patients withdrawn, and etc. So there is a specific format in each institution to submit a progress report to the IRB. Safety reporting, this will be covered in the safety reporting lectures, but mainly it's about any experienced adverse event during the study conduct. It's not an easy process, it's a complex, but it should be done appropriately. Premature termination. You as investigator, if you feel that your study is jeopardizing the safety of your research subject, you have the right to terminate the study. That's why now the kingdom, they are requesting SOSAR done in other sites, or adverse event, serious adverse event done in other site, to be shared with your country. Let's say that so far I'm doing good in my site, no death cases, but in Brazil, for example, we have high death rate. Should I wait until I have this number of incidents? No. You have the legitimate right to terminate the study if you feel that the study is not anymore safe for your research subject, or even you can suspend until further investigation from the sponsor is provided to ensure that the study is so far safe. The final report, this is when you complete the study, when you have almost a clear result that should be submitted to the IRB, that the study recruitment is completed, follow-up completed, data were collected and cleaned, so we are ready to close the study. There is a specific forms you need to submit this to the IRB. Otherwise, the study will be opened and the IRB will continue asking you about the progress. These are examples of common non-compliance. This is the most common examples that we have encountered. This is not from the literature, this is from our experience. Insufficient evidence of investigator involvement or oversight in the study. It happens that for 1 year, for example, there is no proof that the investigator he has oversight, no single entry, no single documentation, no documented delegation of responsibility. Someone is doing specific task in the study without official delegation. Failure to adhere to the protocol requirements, inadequate source document. Change were made to original record without informing the IRB. Failure to report serious adverse event, death cases. It happened that we discovered one patient who died 6 months before, and the BIA doesn't know. This is a negligence. Also, participant did not sign the most current version of the informed consent. Always we are making amendment to the informed consent, so we are only using the latest version of the informed consent. It happened that he is still using version 1, although he is in version 4 right now. Inadequate product accountability record. This is related to the investigational product in the pharmacy. Poor documentation, poor monitoring and auditing for the drug in the research pharmacy. Applying GCP regulations will save your patient and will ensure that your research is in compliance with the international guideline, and will ensure that the generated data is accurate and credible. We can trust. You can publish. You can get approval from the FDAs as well. This is the message always we are sharing. The BI is ultimately responsible for all aspects of the study conduct. Even if someone else in the study team, he did a mistake, still it's your responsibility as investigator to take it in your shoulder. I'm done with the investigator responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Isamme. So I'd like to invite Dr. Hussam again to talk about monitoring, audit, and auditing of clinical research.
Time. Are you still awake and able to follow through? Just a quick reminder, what we are talking about at large is the clinical trials. And the GCP is mainly to ensure the conduct of clinical trials is trusted. At the end of the day, you have data that's collected from many sites, and this data will be information that will support registration, approvals, inclusion in guidelines, or the other way around. So the integrity and the accuracy of the information is extremely important. And the GCP role is to make sure that this is happening. And of course, there is guidelines to help with this. You've seen this picture. From ethical and from monitoring point of view, this is a very important prospect to monitor, because there's a lot of money, there's a lot of efforts, and we don't want to be killing a project simply because we do not follow the proper conduct of the trial. And this has happened significantly often, even in the Western countries. A clinical trial that cost like a few $1 million that ends up being as bad as not doing the trial altogether. So who's going to pay the cost? So again, this is really important, and of course, just keep in mind this concept. The other thing is that we talked about the approvals of the IRB. We said the minimal risk, we can do it as an exempt. There is confusion about the word exempt. Some people might think of this exempt from approval. No, exempt from continuing review. يعني you have a case report, you submit the case report to the IRB, we look at it and we say, okay, go ahead and you can publish. That's it. I exempt you from coming back in 6 months and telling me, wallahi, what happened to my case report. But if the project requires monitoring, that means that it's going to be expedited or full review depending on the risk. So the word exempt is exempt from continuing review. يعني part of our work is continuing review. Some research projects are lengthy, it takes years, and sometimes they are very intense and there's a lot of activities that we have to continue to keep an eye on what is going on with it. So any study, any approval that is more than minimal risk will require continuous review. Just keep us updated what is happening with you. The other day I was reviewing a research project that was approved in 2016. And I said, I'm not going to renew this. Of course, they did not renew it in the past few years. And the researcher were using this probably say, I have an active IRB approval. What study that takes like 8-9 years to conduct? The science advances, the criteria changes. So I said, no, there is no renewal, but I needed a progress report with re-look into the whole project. Because we have to really see what is happening. Is there obstacles? Is this study not feasible? Are we just manipulating the facts? Are we unable to really to conduct the study and keep it active? So again, this is something that we look for. Most of exempt studies, the studies that does not require continuing review. On the other hand, lots of times all what we need to know is what's happening. We started the research, we finished the research, we are running in obstacles in funding, we have recruited a few subjects, we have disapproval from the Saudi FDA. There's a little bit disconnect between the IRB and the other regulatory documents. It all has to go through the PI, and the PI is required to provide us with a progress report every 6 months. Just tell us what is happening, where are you in the process of your research. Not only that, what activities that took place, because there are obligations, as you heard from Isamme, of the PI to the IRB and to the sponsoring body and sometimes to the Saudi FDA. So again, we have to comply with our regulations as we should. Now, the research plan a lot of times will entail in it, will include in it a monitoring plan. The proposal, when they submit the proposal, sometimes they include and sometimes we request that what is your plan for monitoring the study? We are going to be monitoring every case. We are going to have an independent body of monitoring the data to make sure that the safety of the subjects are well maintained. And sometimes the sponsors themselves, if this is a sponsored study, they will have a plan to make sure your site is really compliant. And you know what? Unfortunately, I will have to say it boldly and forgive me. Now we are good at this. I'll tell you to do a task, you will just start writing whatever. But I'm going to send somebody to source document what you are telling me. You said this patient have the liver disease. Where is it documented in the file that this patient has a liver disease? Oh, trust me, he has a liver disease. That does not work. So again, I will send somebody to make sure the data is accurate. Imagine yourself reading an article that you do not trust the content of it. What does it mean? This is the end of that article. This is the end of the science as we know it today. So this is the business of everybody to make sure that we are saying the right thing, not what we believe or perceive. We are biased. We are biased. We wanted to participate. We wanted to be good. We wanted to look great. But at the end of the day, it has to be objective. Objectivity is required, and that's why we do monitoring. Monitoring, we don't do any activity, by the way. Monitoring is to make sure things are done. We don't do monitoring to tell people what to do. We are just wanting to get a sense of comfort that things are done correctly. And if they are not done correctly, Isamme mentioned that there's a case that might not even belong to the research question. The inclusion criteria is not met on this patient. What do we do with this data? It has to be taken out. Yes, some error happened, mistake happened. But if we include the accurate and inaccurate in the pool of data, that will make the data questionable, right? So how am I going to be certain that we are trying to, the results are reflective of what the paper says? The papers, I always look at it in a philosophical way. When you read a paper, you read a clinical trial, there will be a premise or a claim that says, giving this medicine to this group of people according to the inclusion criteria is good. you have to make sure that this claim is accurate in a scientific way. But if you question the data, the source of the data that led to this claim, خلاص يعني ما بني على باطل فهو باطل. You cannot really make conclusions about this. And that's why when you do research in high reputable places, people will be more comfortable. And we started asking, will you trust research from Mozambique ولا من الUS? Simply because at least there are processes that is being conducted. They are signing on the GCB. There are monitoring for them to be certain that things are done correctly. So it's a matter of ease of comfort. Otherwise, the question of the data will be always there. We don't want to have this. It's not nice to have a general reputation about, let's say, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The data there is not very accurate. That's not good. We don't want that to happen. We do want to have reputable institutions, reputable science, bodies that will really generate good knowledge. It's not a matter of publishing or generating knowledge. The knowledge has to be accurate and it has to be usable. Now, usually we always worry about the risk of the individuals, and the monitoring is to make sure that these individuals are protected. And the risk, we don't say that we don't approve high-risk research. No, we do approve high-risk research, but we do want to see enough evidence in the protocol itself. How are we going to protect the individual? Many examples of the monitoring of the trial in the protocol. Recently, we approved a study that on a drug that can cause hyperkalemia. That's known about this molecule that it might cause hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia is not good. It can kill the individual. So we made sure that there's a very good, rigorous plan of monitoring this potassium level. And the proposed plan was not probably enough according to us. We wanted to be extra safe, so we added another 2 checks on the potassium level early in the phase of the study. So this is part of when we talk about the monitoring, whatever procedures that are done for the protocol, that's considered monitoring the safety of the individual. Now the auditing and monitoring from the things that we do, we will talk about it later on. So best thing is really to manage the risk is to identify it and embed in the system somehow, no, this is risky. So I need to take mitigating results to make the risk minimal. And of course, when we do this mitigation results, it has to be applied. And I cannot say that I'm going to go ahead and check liver function test on these patients because this might be a potential risk. I cannot just skip the liver function test. Happened to be accurate, a molecule that was study clinical trial approved by us. And during COVID, they had difficulty monitoring some lab results. So they submitted an amendment. Amendment is a request to change the approved protocol that they will skip checking liver function test. We rejected that amendment. We said no. The study will be compromised. The patient safety is not acceptable. There is a high risk of the patient having liver disease. I cannot, because of COVID, allow the study to go خلاص عن بعد. We could not do that because we are talking about patient risk and what happens if somebody has liver failure or died because of that. So again, these are the things that we wanted to see in the protocol, and we want to make sure that it is being followed. Sometimes some projects, they will say, you know what, we'll have an independent body who will monitor the data after, let's say, 6 months. So somebody will unblind the data. They will look at it. Is it safe enough? So again, all of this is part of the monitoring of the study and making sure that it is conducted properly. On top of all of this, we wanted to ensure the quality of the data that is being monitored, and started talking about the sponsors. They will assign a company, CRO, that will send an agent who will start looking into your file. Is this information supported and documented? You said that this patient has liver disease. Is it? Oh, yes, he has liver disease. So the data that you provide to the study, it's being accurate, and in our part of the world, they overdo it for reasons that I can understand. They come and check every single entry. In the West, they don't do that. They do auditing periodically because they trust that the teams are doing the proper thing. But again, monitoring the data, this is making sure that whatever we tell them, whatever the protocol requires us to do, that is being done and conducted. How frequent we do the monitoring? Sometimes it's an IRB business. Sometimes they say we will do this every 6 months. We say, no, you know what? This is not enough. I wanted you to do it more often. Or the IRB decides, no, this monitoring will be happening yearly. I want you to give me a report every year. But sometimes I'll say, I want you to give me a report every 6 months. And based on the reports that we get from the study or the investigator, we take actions. Sometimes I do an unannounced visits. I do an unannounced phone calls with the PIs, depending on something. Hello, you know what, are you around? Yeah, I just wanted to visit with you if you're okay to see your work, or see just sometimes an official monitoring visit, sometimes unofficial. But again, we have to make sure our researchers understand that they have to keep up with the projects, especially the high-risk ones, the ones that are considered sizable. I recently had an arranged visit with one of PIs because I was not sure if they are going to do the statistics of that study well. So I decided to go visit with them, show me what is your statistical plan, I have doubts. So they met with me, they opened the file, and at least I feel comfortable things are done properly. And unfortunately, again, our part of the world, sometimes they have a research idea, they are pressured by the time and requirements, and they end up not able to meet the intended goal of the study. So what do? They start entering data unnecessarily, they start kind of cutting edges in the project, which will kill the project itself. So I started talking about from the approval process, this project probably will end up being incomplete, and the data that will be generated might be questionable. So again, this is a continuum that when we monitor the studies that we have to do this. It's the responsibility of the principal investigator to submit all these reports and keep the IRB updated and informed. Yes, we are one team, they can delegate the task, but when something goes wrong, the PI will be ultimately responsible. So I encourage everybody to have a good team, delegate. I don't want the PI to know everything and do everything. But at least you have a team that are capable as a team to conduct the study properly. There is parts that the PI has to do, but ultimately he's the responsible person. I'll tell you a story about a PI in the States that went to jail simply because his team took him to jail. He was not a very nice person. He's a neurosurgeon, and he was dating his research coordinator. And during the process, they had personal conflicts. So what did this lady do? She really, informed the American FDA about the misconducts that she knows. She knows all the files. She knows all the errors, all the mistakes. So she reported him, and he got into jail. He was sentenced for like 3 years. So this is a real life story that yes, you delegate, make sure that don't mix business and the pleasure, and make sure that your team is capable, because when something goes wrong, it's not the coordinator, it's not the helper, it is the principal investigator who should be the one who's responsible. So all clinical trial, this is by the GCP, all clinical trial information should be recorded. Again, here we are interested in the integrity of the data and the ability to verify this. We trust the study is going to be done well, but can I verify the information? You might do everything perfect, but if I cannot verify your work, I cannot use your work as like a standard. I cannot say that this is done well. I want it to verify, and if I am unable to verify, we cannot use that data. And if during the process of monitoring, this verification process is not there, khalas, I cannot use this data. There is a breach in the possibility of this not being reflective of the, and you've heard about the responsibilities of the study, that we have to have an approval of the study and we have to comply with the protocol as mentioned. And you are not allowed to change any of the protocol without a prior approval. Any deviation from your side has to be approved. And if it happens that it was, I'm supposed to see the patient after 4 weeks, the patient came after 5 weeks. That happens commonly, but this is deviation from the protocol. The patient was supposed, so you have to notify us there is a deviation. Recently, I referred one of the PIs, very, very good, nice people, team, very good team. They have plenty of clinical trials. I had to refer them to retraining on a project simply because I discovered there is so many deviations from the protocol. The protocol is the study Bible, is the study manual. And if you keep deviating from it, and every single subject is deviated from the original protocol, the protocol will lose its strength of doing exactly what we're intended to do. So I asked them to retrain on the protocol because this is unacceptable. So again, we have to really follow the protocol, and any deviation has to be reported. Now, IRB for us, the sponsor is interested in making sure everything is done, and sometimes you have to report it to the authorities, as I will show you in a few minutes. So again, the randomization procedure should be followed, and one of the bigger responsibilities is to keep an eye on the safety of the individual. The PI cannot have a patient died without him knowing about it, cannot have a serious adverse event on a patient without knowing about it, and knowing about it means that he has to report it. It's his responsibility to let us know. You have a site, you have few patients, you are not going to see the big picture. But when you have somebody who overlook the whole clinical trial from 100 plus sites with some 500 patients, they can see trends. The regulatory bodies can see, you know what, and we are noticing there is more reports about liver toxicity. And this is what we need to see. A site might not be able to see this, but if they don't report properly on time, we are not going to see the big picture, and this might put the people at hazard risk. A study was published showing that still we have a very problem with reporting of the adverse events and the quality of the report. Sometimes they just report an adverse event that really does not have a very good quality. Few slides about this. Adverse event is anything that's not nice or not something that went wrong in a conduct of a trial. It might be related to the drug, it might not be. Somebody who's on a clinical trial and he was, killed in a car accident. That's an adverse event. We have to report it. Somebody has something unrelated, an event that was not very nice. They have to report this as adverse event. Adverse drug reaction has to be linked to the molecule regardless of the dose. So we have to have a concept that this event, this noxious event, is probably related to the drug, and the relatedness is something that is important to keep an eye on. So like a side effect or adverse event of the drug has to be reported because it might be related to the dose. Serious adverse event, meaning that something bad happened that led to hospitalization, death, loss of function, or somebody, even if it's unrelated. So somebody on a clinical trial who was hospitalized. How do I know is this related to the trial or not? We'll have to investigate, we'll have to look into it. The sponsor will look into it, the IRB will look into it, and the regulatory bodies like Saudi FDA will look into it to see if this might be something that is important. We have stopped a study during COVID simply because the mortality rate was high. But after investigation, we felt that the cause of the mortality was the nature of the disease rather than the study itself, the intervention, and then we resumed the study as per the protocol. There is difference between serious adverse event and severe adverse event. To make it probably easy to comprehend, headache might be severe, but it's not serious. Minor stroke, it's minor, but it's serious, but it's not that severe. You got the concept? So seriousness is not the degree, it is the outcome of the event that will mandate if it is considered serious or severe. And always we worry about serious adverse event, even if it is mild, because this is something that is unusual or something that might lead to problems. Unexpected, so SARS, probably something that you've heard. Suspected, unexpected. Sometimes you do a study and you expect certain side effects, meaning this drug A, like methotrexate, is known to cause liver toxicity, abnormality in liver enzymes. That's great, so that's expected. If I see somebody who has liver failure, that's not expected. What is known is that elevation in the liver enzymes. But when you have liver failure, this is considered a serious, unexpected. And if something that is not known about this molecule in the investigator brochure from the available data, maybe there is a good clinical studies on the same molecule, it's not reported anywhere that this causes some side effect. That's considered to be unexpected. We want to see these cases, especially in clinical trials, because this will mandate what is next. I might change the protocol. I might make the safety of the patient subjects. Recently, one of my studies, we were studying, we noticed that there is elevation in the liver enzymes more than 3 times in 7 subjects out of 500. So there was an amendment to the protocol where liver function testing is happening more often, and included in the inclusion criteria, they should not have a certain upper limit of liver function. And this is happening. So these will, educate and update our protocols. The issue is safety. We have to really be aware of what happens. We talked about the seriousness and expectedness, or the Causality is important. There is ways to tell if this event is related to the molecule or not. So, and again, this is published. Most of the time, it is related or unrelated. There is a good chance, probability, and possibility of being related. It is important to look into this. At the end of the day, we'll have to report. We are going to be reporting these adverse events to the IRB, to the sponsor, and sometimes to the Saudi FDA. If it is a sponsored study, we report to the IRB and the sponsor will report to the Saudi FDA. If it is an investigator-initiated, one of you guys decided to look into a protocol, you have to inform the IRB, and sometimes you have to directly through your research center get in touch with the Saudi FDA, and there is a reporting system where you directly get the Saudi FDA involved. All of this has to be monitored and documented, and when we come there, we wanted to see, did you report this? And this is a common error, unfortunately, we see in people not reporting their adverse events. And the report has to be complete, has to be really informative, and there's a lot of narrative, and sometimes why am I considering this there? Planned monitoring is the best. Best thing is to do is to have really a system in the protocol to monitor the study by different means, whether we provide an external monitor or even the nature of the study will mandate us to monitor. Sometimes I write in my approval letter, inform me when you enroll the first subject, because I wanted to keep an eye on the monitoring and keep in touch with the team as they go for it. So we need to understand and know the purpose of the monitoring is to ensure the rights and the well-being of the patient is being maintained. We looked into the protocol, looks good, we have a good plan, we'll approve it. But we want to make sure that this plan is continue to be carried through and the patient is still protected. The reported trial data are accurate. This is very important. Otherwise, we will lose the trust in science. And the conduct of the trial is done according to the approved protocol, because otherwise, we cannot really allow this to happen. Sponsor, usually they appoint their monitoring individual, the company that will provide an agent who come and monitor the conduct, but we do monitoring as well ourselves because we wanted to see if there is any missing data. We want to make sure that they are really compliant with the IRB reporting. Are they keeping us informed? Are they using the latest version of the ICF? You have an approved protocol with approved consent. If you are going to change that consent, you cannot just change it. You have to let the IRB know, because we read the content and it's okay or not okay to accept the newer version. And we stamp that this is acceptable and you use the latest version of the informed consent. So we want to make sure that it's being monitored. So what do we monitor? If I'm going to monitor a study, there are certain things that I wanted to make sure that, besides what we mentioned, we want to make sure that the file is complete. Issam has mentioned the master file where you have data in the file. I want to make sure that you keep the latest version of the IB. You make sure that in the file there is the GCB, there is the delegation log. Like, let's say the other day I was monitoring a study and I saw a name of somebody getting the consent. I said, who's this person? Oh, this is our nurse. Is she in the study? Oh, yeah. So she was approved to be part of the team. Is she okay to get an informed consent? And she was not. So this is deviation from the accepted protocol. They did not give her the authority to sign the consent. It has to be given to her, and probably sometimes we do not accept in the IRB, we might not accept that this individual should obtain the consent. I wanted somebody else to really be involved. So again, this has to be documented in the file. And the documents are very essential, because this is if you have an audit, if you have somebody who's coming to verify your data, the file should be there. Are you following the latest version of the IB? Yes or no? Are you following the latest version? Are you getting any letters from, let's say, the sponsor? There is a safety monitoring board and they generated a report. Do you have that report in the file or not? If it's not there, this is a problem. They do the monitoring for the patient safety, but you are not knowing about it in your site and you are not going to apply their recommendations into your study. So when I monitor, I look into this file, make sure that it's complete. I see insurance companies or insurance policies for the trial that are expired. They provide you the insurance in the beginning. After a year or two, the insurance is expired. How am I going to be, assuring that if something goes wrong, the institutions are not going to suffer from the cost, or the patient or somebody else? So just these are the things that we monitor, the documents. And of course, we look into the protocol. I still remember there was recently a patient who has thyroid study at KFMC, and they included the wrong patient. I mean, when I looked into the inclusion criteria, this was investigator initiated, and they did not fulfill the criteria. So how do you include this patient in the pool? So you are not really studying the what are you studying? So again, one incident that gets picked up will mandate every other person will be looked at, because I want to make sure that they know the protocol and they include the patient they wanted to include. And you want to make sure and verify that the investigator and the trial staff are performing the trial functions as they should. You have to make sure that everything that's reported is there. You have to make sure that IRB correspondences are in the file, and any other correspondences from the FDA, for example, or the sponsor are in the file. Now, this functionality of monitoring is given to us by the law. Yani, part of the IRB, your local IRB should have the authority to monitor any study and audit and look at the files of any study. And this concept is behind why King Khalid has to have their own IRB, KFMC have to have their own IRB. I cannot have a jurisdiction or an authority on, let's say, a dermatology clinic to go there and say, okay, I want to see your research. But the law gives me this authority. If I don't have established an agreement with that dermatology clinic that I can come and look at their research files anytime I wish, and they have to comply with me, that means I don't have enough authority to monitor that site. And this is a problem, because no monitoring, we don't know what happens. The safety of the subjects might not be adequately there. Right? So again, this is important to keep an eye. And we talked about the records, that all the records have to be completed, and we look into it. I'm not going to talk much about it, but I think Issam has mentioned a lot of these comments. Most common violations we see when we monitor studies are related to the GCP is the protocol adherence. We discover, unfortunately, the protocol is not very well adhered to. Maybe they deviated. They did not inform the IRB that they deviated. So the protocol adherence is number one problem when it comes down to monitoring. And the records, keeping all the records. Sometimes the record is there. Wallah, oh, it's in my email. But it's not in the study file. It has to be in the study file where you have this document. When you take it, you have everything related to the research in that document. You cannot have pieces in the email, pieces in another file. So that's why it's called master file, that has to include everything. You will hear more about the informed consent, but the process of the informed consent, we discover there are problems, the signatures, the documentation, and as Issam said, sometimes we discover the patient has even not been approached for a signed consent. They should sign the consent, but they never did sign the consent, or they are using the wrong version of the consent. So again, these are the common deviations that we see. Drug accountability is important. You have to have a good pharmacy and a special unit in the pharmacy that deals with the clinical trials drugs, because this is important. When did you receive the drug, the expiry date, the amount, because some of the research will require counting the pills and what will happen to the pills after they get used and consumed. Sometimes these have to be maintained in a specific temperature, specific fridge. So this is, again, it's a business by itself. The other day I was monitoring a study and I discovered that they have the drug of the study in the office of the PI. Luckily, the molecule is safe at room temperature. It does not need anything specific. But I said, how do you know that the temperature in your room is compliant with the research findings? Oh, we have a temperature log. I did not pass that monitoring without seeing the temperature log, and I encourage them to really have a specific area where they can keep their medications. Again, this is part of the capability of the research centers to deal with it. Adverse events, documenting, and reporting. We have cases that we discovered during the monitoring visit. Oh, the patient died, Balash died. They have a little adverse event, they were hospitalized. Nobody knew that they were hospitalized. Now we did what we did at KFMC as an example, is that we linked the patient record to the research record. Meaning, if a research study comes to be at KFMC, their file will indicate that they are research patients. And if this research patient have an event like a hospitalization, ER visit, there will be notification of the team that your patient has been hospitalized. They might, be hospitalized in another place. But ideally, when I look at the patient, oh, this is a research patient. They mentioned the protocol and they mentioned the PI. Let's at least notify them for our colleagues so that they can take action, reporting and making sure that their patients are very well taken care of. What I do, and I try to, monitoring is always not nice. When you call somebody for monitoring, they start being anxious. I always try to encourage them and say, this is a routine visit. It's meant to make sure everything is okay. We're not here to really cause any difficulty for anybody. So I send them a nice letter that please, we are going to monitor your study, make the available. We respect your time. If you're busy, just get me the file. I can come to you, and I offer them me going to their offices. And sometimes they come to my IRB office where they bring the file with them. I make it as easy as possible. And of course, we send them a copy of what we do. Now, Isamme mentioned that some PIs are difficult. They might not comply with the monitoring. Or when you monitor, you come up with a report and they don't comply with your recommendations. Here, the IRB authority is sometimes the practice that you send them a warning letter. By the way, if you don't comply by this date, your study is jeopardized to be suspended. And if the study is important, without an IRB coverage, you are liable as an individual. People have to know this as PIs. If the IRB tell you your study is suspended, anything, if the patient dies, it will be in your neck. This is the Saudi law, this is Saudi FDA regulations. So you are in good terms with the IRB, and you just comply with them. And we know that you're busy. We can be a little bit patient. Sometimes we give you a little extra time. But at the end of the day, you have to comply. This is an authority. And if I suspend the study, recently it happened that somebody, not suspension, but they sent me a report that we wanted to terminate our study. Are you sure? Yeah, okay, fine. Terminated. 2 years later, they came to publish their data. And I said, no. Your study was terminated by you. I'm not going to allow you to publish it. Simply because you did not inform me that you are going to reopen the subject and you continue. You had an initial approval that was terminated. Any new action will have to be new action. Sometimes people might make modifications of the protocol because it's taking too long. I refuse to make an amendment because I feel that the project has completely transformed. So I request that they submit a new application and start from scratch, or use some of the old data into retrospective and sometimes prospective. So again, this is very important to comply because it will mean meaning for why are you doing the research. If you are going to publish, you have to have a letter, it's okay to publish. And if you are going to get reimbursement or you get some incentives, if you don't comply with the the regulations, you're not getting that letter. So the purpose or the objective of your research will not be even fulfilled, whether financially or by reputation or by compliance with regulations. And of course, it will subject you to potential consequences. Recently, again, a researcher failed to register their study at the Saudi FDA. Saudi FDA were not happy because they realized and know this study is ongoing without being registered. They came and they audited our hospital, they audited the site, and luckily it was very low risk and we managed it. But again, eyes are kept open on the research nowadays. Do it correctly, learn how to do it. Sometimes most of our mistakes because we don't really know what is the right thing to be done. But again, it's an activity that we are engaging in. Mine as well. Let's do it right and get the team to help you, and hopefully everybody will end up publishing and contributing positively to the science of the knowledge and science, and just have our place properly placed at the map of research in the world. Thank you.
Dr. Dania is a Vice President and Executive Director of the Research Centre at the Riyadh Second Cluster. She obtained her MD degree from King Saud University, and she specialised in reproductive endocrinology and infertility. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to make it brief because I know everyone is tired. I'm just going to give you some practical examples about what we do in the consent. I've been trained on this informed consent and the GCP training. And no, not this one. So the GCP training actually took a full week, and this was from the UK. And we're just trying to give you bits and pieces of practical points to be covered. And what Hussam and Isamme has been mentioning is very important. Because we really need to comply, like we need to really follow the steps of the GCP. Research is difficult and it's very challenging, but if we do it the right way, it's because we want to contribute to science. That's our main aim. And what we have mentioned is because, like you don't need to cater everything on your shoulder. You need to be supported. You need to have this backup from IRB, from the SFDA. Don't take it alone. Like we're here to help. So what is informed consent? Consent, people think it's a form, you just fill it up and you just sign. You don't need to really follow up with the patient. It's actually a process. We need to continually, like inform the patients of anything that comes up, like new. So basically, this is the process by which a subject really voluntarily confirms his willingness to accept and participate in your research. And then you have to really make sure that the like subjects or patients are informed about all the aspects of the trial. Informed consent is documented by a means of written, signed, and dated informed consent form. I just want to ask everyone, do you know how many forms of consent, like you need to really, if we're, like using paper, how many copies do you need to have if you're doing research? 3 2 1. No, actually at least 3. So 3, why 3? Like we said we want to be practical. I'm just not going to be talking. So if you have an informed consent and you decided to put this subject in this trial, you need to give him, like sometimes Dr. Hussam and Isamme has always mentioned, and we know you're busy clinicians, you're busy doing research, but sometimes if the patient comes and you feel in the clinic, let's say, that this subject is really fit into coming into this trial, just give him the consent, let him read it. Like he can take it home, come after a week, make sure he absorbs it right. And then this copy is one with the patient, one in the file, and one in the researcher's file. So it is, like that's what we monitor as well. We make sure that the patients have one, or the subjects, you have a copy, and in the file there's a copy. So without fully informed consent, why are we worried? Because the subject, or the patient might sue you because you didn't tell him what was happening. Ethics, trust, approval, also the IRB might withdraw your approval. Future proposals might not be supported, and inspection audit requirements are a must of these proposals. Have you heard of the ER ketamine? This was in the US, and one of the powerful drugs that has been, given to subjects without their consent. And the FDA finds out, and guess how? One of the patients have really, complained about the researchers, and they complained about the IRB because the IRB waived the consent. Because these patients were coming to the ER, they said there is not enough time to give, patients the consent to sign, so they decided to waive the consent. So the IRB was blamed, the PI was blamed, and all of them underwent investigation. So it's very important for you to be careful about that. Why is it referred to as a process? Why do you think it's a process? It's not a one-time journey. What might happen? You have heard, like adverse events, like one of the examples that we had once, a patient, he slipped on the street, and then we found out that he was, recruited in one of the clinical trials. They considered it as an adverse event, and then how come we didn't report it? The patient slipped. Even if the patient slipped outside the hospital premises, you still need to report it. So it's a process. We need to know what is happening to the patient. Why do we need to follow up? What is happening? It's an ongoing interaction between us and the subject. So handing a participant the consent document does not mean, that's enough. You need to talk to them, you need to inform them, you need to ask him if he really understands, and give him time, because most of the times I'm going to show you in a bit why do patients or subjects do not sign, or why don't we have enough time to do that. So research staff members are obligated to share any new information related to subjects' participation, new identified side effects, for instance, as Dr. Hussam mentioned, hyperkalemia is a serious side effect. One of the subjects have had this, and you need to monitor this, and you may need to make sure that the patients or subjects come to you and report that. Why is it so important? Because as you all know, it is an ethical requirement. IRB, asks of that, protects the rights and safety and well-being of subjects, and for me, it's a protection for you as a researcher as well. Regulatory requirements: no investigator may involve a human subject in research unless the investigator has really approved the legally effective informed consent of the subject or the subject's legally authorized representatives. I'm reading some of the statements because these are from the ICH GCP. The consent process is different for every subject. So each subject is different. He might have different history, different age, different medications he's taking, different social history. So you need to really make sure that he understands and absorbs it. Different for every study, essential for study success and IRB approval, providing clear definition between where standard of care leaves off and research begins, and allows re-educating yourself and the patient or the subject, requires reassessment of the subject understanding of each visit. Do you understand what you're going through? Do you understand that it's only fair to be, honest and open? This is one of the interesting studies I've looked at because, many of you have girls, I'm sure, in their teenage or, adolescent years. So many people come to me as an obstetrician and ask me, do you want to vaccinate your girls? Do you recommend vaccine, the vaccine of HPV? And, through this, vaccines have undergone several, research until it is approved. Personally, I didn't give my girls vaccines because I don't feel that, this has been long studied, but so many people do still recommend vaccination. But this vaccination scandal of HPV, which is the human papilloma virus, because in the gynae clinic, we do see a lot of cervical cancers. We do now recommend to give the vaccines. But this vaccine trial have been undergone on young girls in India without their approval. Do you think this is appropriate? Because they heard the HPV vaccine protects against cervical cancer in their later years. Do you think this is an appropriate act to give vaccination because they have heard that HPV is good? I'm sure most of you would not agree. So I wouldn't want it on myself or any relative of mine. So what information does a person need in deciding whether to participate in the study? There are basic elements. I'm not gonna, research have, elaborated on if I'm giving a lecture or anyone is giving a lecture, most of the time you're gonna be remembering 10% of what I'm saying. So what I really need you to know is informed consent is a process. You need to have it. It's a protection for your subjects and your patients. It's an IRB requirement. Plus, just remember that you need to mention basic important stuff plus benefits, alternatives, risks, as any consent that you sign. Benefits, alternatives, risks need to be in the consent. So please make sure that the study involves research purpose, treatment, randomization, and study procedures to be followed, the foreseeable risk or inconvenience, the expected benefit, alternative, risks, benefit, alternative. And you need to tell them that their records are going to be confidential, compensation if there are any, contact information, and their voluntary refusal to participate, and there will be no loss of benefits. I'm not going to tell you this because it's too much, but here is an example of one of the consents that we use at King Fahd Medical City and Riyadh Second Cluster. If you can see here, just to make it easier. So here we do, the IRB log number if there is before the consent, subjects or study number, medical record number, study title, PI, the principal investigator, the address, and the telephone. And this is a requirement. And many of the times we do return the consent because this is missing. A member of research team will explain to you what is involved in the study. You need to tell them a bit of what is, the background of the study. Why is this study being done? The objectives, how many people will take part of the study, it's their right to know. Maybe it's 2 or 3, maybe it's 100. What will happen if I take part in this study? Okay, what is expected of me during the study? Is it clear? Well, how long will I be in the study? Is he going to be there for a year, 2 years, 3 years? Can I stop being in the study? And then you can tell him that yes, he can stop participating in the study at any time. Are there risks if I stop being in the study? You need to reassure them that there will be no risks. Or if you are, assuming if there are any risks, what side effects or risks can I expect from being in this study? Are there any benefits? You need to tell them if there are benefits. What other options are there? What happens if I'm injured because I took part in this study? This needs to be mentioned. What are the costs of taking part of this study? Basically we say compensation for meals, parking, this is okay, but not giving them subjects actual money. And this goes through the IRB if there are any monetary, benefits to the patient. Will I be paid for taking part of this study? And they need to know whether yes or no. And most of the time, sponsored clinical trials do provide, parking, fees or meals or whatever. Will my medical information be kept private? What are my rights if I take part in the study? You need to inform him. Who do I call if there is any question or problem? And we do require, specifically in the IRB, that a number is there for the subject to have. And then here the principal investigator or those who are, as mentioned, who can give the consent and the stamp. And usually we require a stamp on every page of the consent. Because sometimes when we do monitoring and there is no approved IRBs, because sometimes you might print a different form and use it. So we need to make sure that each page is really stamped. Request for waiver of consent process. Sometimes, you might ask the IRB to give you a waiver and that you don't need a consent, and we really need to make sure why. The study involves no greater than minimal risk. The rights and welfare of the subjects are really maintained, and the research could not be practically carried out without, the waiver, specifically, as an ER setting, unconscious patients, stroke patients, and so forth. So barriers to understanding the consent. Why do you feel, sometimes the subjects do not understand? Because they might have defective capacity of understanding, maybe Alzheimer patients, maybe stroke patients, maybe, unconscious. Level of education, social, cultural values, language, age, environment, their fear, they may be in pain. Sometimes, patients are in pain and you need to consent them. They're not, ready to listen. They're in pain, they need to be treated. They're not ready really to listen to what you have to say. So investigator responsibility in involving subjects in research, it's your ultimate responsibility. That's why research is difficult. It's our responsibility to make sure that they understand. You are there to protect them. They're there to help them to make them understand. So you need to really to reduce the risk as minimum as possible. And you need to follow the protocol. So ensure the subject is one who wants to participate, free from coercion or other undue influence, as you heard. Consistent with IRB approved process. Provide new information if there is anything that comes up and you want the subject to know about. It's the time where this process stops and you inform the subject about their needs or any new information. And you need to document, of course, that. Example of consent documentation, the subject name on the day of so and so. This needs to be in the file, because now we're having the EPIC, so it's very nice and easy. We have a research module, we have, everything online. But if you're still using the paper, this needs to be documented and put in the chart. Procedures of informed consent, completion for adults and children. So adults more than 18, usually we do provide a consent, and sometimes we need a legally acceptable representative, which is al-wasi al-qanuni. If they're not able, such as unconscious patients, Alzheimer patients, demented patients, you need to have someone, we call them the LAR, the legally acceptable representative. If they're illiterate, illiterate, sometimes we use someone else who is there with the legal representative to be an impartial witness and help him understand what's happening in the research. So this is an example. If you're using an impartial witness the legal representative and the like on the behalf of the patient, plus the investigator who's responsible. So obtaining a consent from the parents. Do you think, like if a child is a 7-year-old, do you think we should be telling him about the research? Or you think, he's still a child and he doesn't need to know? So there is something called assent for children. So yes, we need to inform the children. Obtain the child assent to his own participation if the age is more than 7. And this is an IRB recommendation. We need to use simple language. Parents, guardian provides legal consent for the child to participate in research, and document the child's assent with an assent form is needed. So this is an example of an assent form, and we need to tell him in plain language that this is a research, we're going to do this, like we're going to take a simple masalan prick from the finger or a little bit of blood which is equal so and so, don't worry. If he refuses, like you cannot recruit. So this is an assent form for minors. This is an example of our IRB's assent forms. So common problems. What are the common problems, like that we do find in the informed consent? Use of incorrect ICF informed consent forms or expired. Like that's why the IRB is always making sure that, like you're up to date, your processes are right, your documents are right, they're not expired. As he has mentioned, like if you're doing a study for a year, your approval for a year, this should be adhered to. You cannot, after 6 years, use the same consent and say that, like I've been doing a research. Research team completing dates and times for the subject. Please make sure the date and time. Sometimes you do sign and you forget the date and the time, which are very essential as well. So this would be a breach if you don't put your date, the time, the signature. This is not good. Incomplete signature of subject and consenting person on different dates. Like let's say I recruited a patient in the clinic and he agreed and then he signs and then I don't sign on the same date. I sign maybe 2 days later. This is not appropriate. We have to sign it on the same day and the date. As has been mentioned earlier, person obtaining the consent is not qualified, providing all but the last page of the consent. Like sometimes you do have the consent signed, but and the like the last page is not signed, or like some documents are not stamped. So you need to make sure that all your documents are appropriately signed and labeled and stamped. Changes made to the consent documents by hand. Let's say you found out, like the nurses have been taking, instead of 6 mLs of blood, they took 5 ml, and then you started changing your consent 5 ml, 5 ml, 5 ml by hand. You cannot do that. You need to go back to the IRB, change the consent, and make sure this is changed. So reconsenting in IRB-approved research studies, sometimes we do need to reconsent the patients. Significant changes in your research procedure, you have changed something, you have changed the investigators, the procedure, the amount of, let's say, blood that you're taking. If you found any, risks, this needs to be told to the subjects. Failing to inform the subject about the important risks related to the study is also needed. Using a proper representative for a subject who's not capable of making an informed choice. New alternative treatments becomes available. Everyone knows about the Tuskegee study, syphilis, when it was a big scandal in the US. When the penicillin became available, they did not inform them that there is a new treatment and you can be stopped, you can be healed from syphilis. They continued to conduct the experiments and so many patients died. This is not appropriate. You need to tell them it's their right to know. For research involving the participation of children reaching adulthood, this also needs to be updated. So let's say, you recruited someone who was unconscious, in pain, you might need to tell him, if he's awake and conscious again, that he, you can consent him of, reconsent him because he gained conscious or he, his cognitive ability became better. The IRB also would not necessarily require reconsent under the following circumstances: changes to the study team. Sometimes he might pass it if there's a resident or, junior intern, or like some like assistance that is not really major, or there are minor documents like such a full stop or a comma, but other than that like major changes needs to be done. So let me just give you a simple questions and see if you'd answer them right. Which of the following pieces of information need to be included when obtaining informed consent? Do you think we need to have diagnosis, risk, benefits, alternatives, families' wishes? Which one? B, D? B? Need not. D. Need not be indicated in the consent is the family's wishes. Let's say they are wishing something, you cannot, it's not their wish. In which of the following circumstances could informed consent be waived? When a minor is considered as emancipated, like he's, like free. When a patient is found to be incompetent. When immediate treatment is necessary to prevent death or permanent impairment. When the subject is aged more than 18. Waived. Yes, C. In which of the following cases is a minor not considered emancipated, free, or self-sufficient? I'm not gonna, this is from a US, usually if he's in the US Army, but this does not apply to us. Type. Age 6 to 7. So in having an assent, a simple oral description of the child's involvement is given to the participant and verbal assent is requested. The procedure may be documented on the informed consent form by the presence of a signature of a witness. Age 8 to 13, a more complete oral description of the research in layman's terminology in basic language is given to the participant. Verbal assent is requested. The procedure may be documented on informed consent form by a signature or a witness. Above the age of 13, what do you think? Written assent should be requested from both the parent and the child using age-appropriate and background-appropriate information. Just another question. So can a parent or a guardian be the witness of a child's verbal assent document? The child said yes.
No. If he's not legal guardian, yes. But there might be bias.
Can the parent or a guardian be the witness?
He might change his mind anytime.
Yes.
But it should be somebody else.
صح.
So he shahad.
Yes. So it's no. The parent or a guardian may not be the witness for a child verbal assent document. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a simple example here because I like this when I, looked at the research. Because sometimes, like we in children specifically, there is a number of mLs or spoons that you need to specify if you're gonna be taking blood. So don't think it's just a simple blood draw, because this has to be represented by ml per kilogram of a child. It depends. In the preterm infant, it's different. In a 1-year-old, it's different. In a 3-year-old, different. So please, this is a reference for full review board in IRB approvals to be approving the consent. IRB. So the IRB, I'm not going to talk about that, but the IRB, the institution review board needs to really make sure to protect the welfare of the our subjects. I'm not going to go through this. So just to conclude, informed consent is a process that begins with the recruitment and screening of a subject and continues throughout the subject's involvement in the research. It includes providing information about the study to the subjects in a way that is very understandable to them, answering questions to ensure that the subjects understand the research and their role in it, and giving subjects enough time, please, to consider their decisions. And then obtaining voluntary agreement of subjects to take part in the study. The agreement is only to enter the study, as subjects may withdraw at any time, decline to answer specific questions, or complete specific tasks at any time during the research. It's their right. Just make sure that the documentation is there. And this is the statement that I've taken from the IC, GCP. As you know, like King Fahd Medical City and the Riyadh Second Health Cluster have taken the approval and the accreditation to train on GCP. And you can read the full documentation from their website, and it's very thorough. But just remember, please, it's a process. Risks, benefits, alternatives, their right to leave at any time is a must. And in summary, a key goal of IRB is to protect the human subjects from physical or psychological harm, which they attempt to do by reviewing research protocols and materials. And research conducted on humans must, be very vigilantly, reviewed, and documentation is there, informed consent, and voluntarily expression of the consent, and adequate form of, basically being transparent and open and honest. And participation of vulnerable patients in clinical trial is regulated by specific law dispositions. And on this, I conclude, and thank you for your attention. I know it's the end of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Dania. Very nice talk. And safety and informed consent are probably the most important aspects of GCP. So we have a few minutes just for any questions that anyone might want to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Hussam, and Dr. Dania, for a really excellent and informative lecture. Research is a common interest for most of the people, especially in medical, and nowadays it's more important. And nowadays it's more important because it is a promotion. You can't promote without having research, and also the government nowadays having full support to research. My question, and before question, all the medical people, they are interested in research, but some will find the key, and some will be, even they are excellent, but they don't have the keys. So what are the keys to make things easy for people to write this research? Because what I am seeing from protocols always, because I work in research for many years, and these protocol make it difficult for people, because it is like exercise. Before you start, you are interested. When you start, you will feel difficult. When you get used to it, you will like it and love it and continue. So people will, when they get the keys, they will write hundreds, and they will publish many research, and they will be very interested, and it will be part of their lives. But if they have the obstacles like now, in Western countries, most of the people, security will do all these protocols, and just when they review, they will just call you and finish, and you will proceed without any problem. But here, we don't have it. I think in all over the kingdom, even I have relation with King Faisal, which is the most place which started all this research. You will find 1, 2, 3, 4 people, they are writing research. The rest, however, they are very interested, but they will not do because they don't have the keys. So please, what are the keys? The other, if you allow me, Dr. Hussam, if I get paper from Mozambique and paper from United States, and paper from Mozambique is good and excellent and has all the things, I will accept it rather than states. Thank you.
Thank you for, I was boiling, and no, this is a very difficult question. Everyone has a different answer, I'm sure. But, when you ask, the first thing that came to my mind is teamwork. Teamwork really matters. And as you said, because most of, if you have a skilled secretary, sometimes now we are training our nurses, secretaries, how to help us, because as you said, you're busy, you don't want to fill the forms. I've written the proposal, I'm going to put it in the form and put it in the IRB. We've trained few secretaries to really do this, application of the forms. And specifically for the juniors, I would really say have a mentor. Start small, and then slowly you will like it with time. It becomes very entertaining and fun. I used to tell my residents, research is fun, but you need to take it, it takes time, it takes a lot of effort. You need to, teach the people around you how to do it, and then it becomes easy. The first 3, 4 are a bit difficult, but if you teach your, team, then you become a team to start publishing, and it goes, it becomes easy. And for me, that's the key. A key, because I've seen them a lot, the young ones. How do we start? How to do that? First of all, you need to attend research courses and be trained, and then have a team around you, because you cannot do it alone. It's difficult.
Right. And I'll have a different answer to you, but starting with Mozambique, I know nothing about that country. I use it a lot in my talks, But the idea is you have to build the trust.
Is there
I
any-
agree with you. If I trust a place,
Is there anyone from Mozambique here, by the way?
but that's good. That's good. So maybe that's the next place to go to. So the idea is you have to establish the trust. When you know that these people are good and following guidelines, and I can use another hospitals locally. Do you trust King Faisal or Ligwaiye General Hospital? It's same concept. The concept is not in the name of the thing, and you can build the trust. Yes, every now and then we have to update and upgrade our trust, because sometimes things are not as we think perfect, but this is the idea. Now, the answer to the keys, you have to approach research in two different mentalities, or three. The first mentality is a career path, and this is something that we are seeing a lot recently, that people are changing their professions into a research career path. Pharmacist just does not want to continue in pharmacy. They will start, working on research, finding an opportunity, gaining some experience, and then they end up their life being in the research, not necessarily a researcher, but the regulations, the Saudi FDA, the research center somewhere. So that's one. And by the way, this is very common. We have nurses, we have pharmacists, and few physicians who fail to probably progress after their medical school that they are doing research with us in the research center. That by itself is incentive for people to become researchers. And these are good for the know-how rather than the science. Now, the other part that I wanted to answer is that if you look into the acknowledgement or the acquirement of knowledge, there is a Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but research comes at the top of the pyramid. Meaning, you will start knowing an information, you understand the information, you apply it, you become experienced with it, you troubleshoot it, and at the end of it, you will become a researcher because you have a very deep understanding of anything. Now, in order to be an expert, unfortunately, we become experts by reading, a small article or even the summary of an article. That's not it. You have to be very deep in your understanding, and you're really, really grasping that area of experience that you have, whatever it is. Pulmonary, ICU, sleep, fertility. So once you are really deep, you feel that you have to really do research because this is part of the continuum of your career. Now we are asking undergraduates to perform research and they don't know their subject. That's partly I have an issue with that because it's nice to be introduced to the research methodologies, not to be counted probably at this level of their career path. And the third one, this is how I started, I always look at research as an essential component of life. Now, we keep talking about research, I have a glaucoma, I have some disease, but no, everything we do in life is researched. And if you start having that mentality, understanding the research terminology, the research concepts, you will live a better life by analyzing what goes on with you, because you will have the ability to critically think and to try to really judge whatever is people telling you. You see a lot of crap in the social media. You see a lot of even published evidence. But once you start looking at it, you know better that this article I will throw away. So I started my interest in research in another way. From my clinical work, understanding the evidence base, and in order for somebody to say this, you have to go through some phases and stages. And with time and experience, you will gain it. So I think this is probably going to answer your things. We do need a lot of basic understanding of research at an earlier concept. If you look into the high school curriculum of some decent countries, they have research embedded with them. If you look into the international exams that high school students have to, and including our students, they have to sit for, a lot of the data that they are asked about actually research methodology. In biology, you have these insects and you wanted to do a trial, it's all research. So basically they start introduction to the research concepts early in their acquisition of knowledge, to the point where when they become ready, they will be actual researchers. And again, now funding is helpful, some change of ideas. This is sexy, what everybody is talking about research, let's do it. It might help, but really you have to have this deep understanding and contact with research so that you will be successful. Requirements are important, but at least learn something from that requirement, not just give it away. There are companies now that are making money out of our unfortunate poor trainees they will just give them the project. They will pay them money and they will give them a completed product ready to publish, which is not healthy. This is not the intention of really mandating research in our curricula at the university level. A master student called me the other day, said, listen, I have to submit this. I'm not going to do the research. Just give me the approval. I said, Ya binti, I cannot approve. This is madroob. And too bad to put my name on approving such a project. She said, trust me, we were not going to do the project. I just wanted to fulfill my requirement. Is that acceptable? Is that why we have masters and PhDs in our universities? Sorry to say this, but this is from personal experience. We are missing the whole point.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No offense for Mozambique, huh?
Any further questions? Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you for the very nice lecture. I have one question in being, of course, I believe in being honest with the patient, open with the patient before any surgical procedure. But up to what extent we have to be open and explain to the patient every single point or every single detail? I mean, for like a normal surgery, I not mean for any research or something. I mean, at the ethical conduct or the point of view. I believe, of course, I have to be so honest with the patient, but up to which extent I have to explain every single like a bit of complication which is normal to happen, that it actually happened with his child. I'm a pediatric ophthalmologist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. This is very important and debated issue. How much informed you need to be to sign the informed consent? When I review a clinical trial that's very well structured, the clinical trial, the informed consent is 20 to 40 pages long. They include everything in it, including basic science, research, and data, to the point where it became a legal document. This informed consent, it became a legal document. So again, there is no clear guidance on where do you, how much information you offer, but there are essential components in any research consent or informed consent that has to be there. First, the patient has to really know that this is research, clearly. He came to you, he came to me as a patient. He's coming to King Khalid Eye Hospital because these are the experts. He did not come to you as a researcher. Some other patients, it becomes easier because outside, they might even publish, advertise for their research in the newspaper. How many times in the universities outside, you will have, a description of the study and the phone number of people, just they are cut. So I'm walking by, I'm interested in this bulletin, and this study might, for sleep, for example, just regular people might have a minor issue. They will take the number, they will call, and they will try to voluntarily participate. So
I just mean a normal scheduled surgery for a pediatric ophthalmology, like cataract surgery for a child or cancer. I don't mean any research issues.
For
I mean like
consent
normal surgery.
In general,
yes.
okay.
Exactly.
Now that will put you in trouble if you don't be elaborative. Even our templates for research, for procedures might not be sufficient depending on the surgery. To the extent of friends of mine, surgeons, they start writing their consent in documentation in the file. That we spoke about this side effect, we spoke about this potentiality, and sometimes they go to the extreme if the patient is a little bit high risk, so that they cover themselves in the court. So whatever that's not mentioned, clearly mentioned in the consent for your procedure, you are responsible for. Now, our countries are not as rigorous, but 3 years ago in the US, some surgeon went into like a trial simply because the patient said, he did not tell me this information. So be careful, sometimes outside you have to be careful and document everything that has been said. Because the patient say, Wallahi, I was not told. And just having them sign is sometimes not enough. Sometimes they send the junior person to obtain the consent, which is against the law, by the way, because you don't know what your fellow or your resident said to the patient, and you are the expert surgeon. So ideally, the consent has to be obtained by the person who's responsible for his procedure. So again, that's another legal issue that you do what you normally do. Try to be elaborative and make sure that you select your patient. Most of the time in our part of the world, it will not lead to any problems. But ethically, the patient needs to understand, this is the probabilities, what are the chances. And I did have a small minor procedure when I was in the States. I went to the best available physician who can do this procedure. And as he was talking to me, he starts saying the probability of not getting the results is like 30% and whatnot. So you know what? I signed for him. He was too honest. He was too extensive because I selected him. I went to him because I know he's the best in his area. So I can live with a little bit of, you're in the best hands. If something will go wrong, at least you did your part and hopefully they will do their part. So again, it comes down to a trust issue. Make sure that your patients trust you and you trust that they are here to seek for the intention. Nobody is coming to sue you. Nobody is coming to really find a problem so that they can catch you up. But as a surgeon performing a procedure, just document the consenting process properly. Most of the time, and I see this happening every day, just sign here. This is unacceptable. This is unethical, to be honest with you. Patients who come to the hospital, do you know that they never read their admission paper consent? It includes research, it includes, if you are not gonna agree to be seen by a resident, you will be kicked out. You are not allowed to sue the hospital. And there are things in the admission, the waiver or with the consent in admission, it's not acceptable. But again, people do it to protect themselves in case something happens.
Somebody videotape the interaction between the surgeon and the patient. And outside in the US, it was, now some hospitals, they videotape.
So again, it depends on how much extent you want it to do. A patient is coming to you to get help, they trust you, they will sign the consent, you told them what you know, and things are expected. People we lack this deep understanding. Everything is kosher, everything is great, until something goes wrong. And then disasters happen.
That's what I mentioned earlier, you have to give him the paper. You have a full consent, you have everything documented, give it to him, let him read it. Because sometimes patients do come, Doctora, you didn't explain to me this. No, I say, sorry, but I explained it, or I've written it in the file, I've given you the form, and you have your signature here. How come, but I forgot. No. You have to be honest. And then don't be afraid and something is scary. Okay, so what if she's not recruited? Someone else will be recruited. Or, specifically in surgical procedures, it's their right to know the risks.
And research is even more rigorous, simply because when they come to you, there is already a consent to come to you as an eye surgeon. You did not catch them, come, I want to do surgery for you. That's an implicit consent that they wanted to seek your help. But for research, it's different because he's coming to you to be treated, and yet you are offering him to be part of a research. So that's why it has to say in the consent, this is research. You can say no, and that's not going to influence your treatment. You're going to continue to be okay. We will treat you here. You're going to be offered the best care possible. So again, these are we highlight it so that people are clear on this idea, and they can choose, voluntarily with full control over their decision.
Thank you very much. So make sure you've all registered outside, because you'll receive a certificate of GCP training in the next day or two. And I would just like to thank the speakers by giving them a certificate of appreciation. So Mr. Isamme.